Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if lazy Naruto joins Teen Titans Naruto X Raven. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by JINX777, link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1, New World. The first thing Naruto noticed as he regained consciousness was the noise. All around him, he could hear loud roaring sounds over the top of what must have been thousands of people, mixed in with several odd noises he couldn't place. There was a terrible smell that was making his nose burn. Next was the realization that he was lying on the ground in what he hoped was a puddle. His clothes were drenched and he shivered as the cold was started to get to him. It was at this point that the pain hit, like someone had thrust a kunai into his head. Rubbing his head where it hurt, Naruto slowly sat up and opened his left eye to look at the blood on his hand from an already healed cut. Shaking his head in an attempt to clear the fog that seemed to surround his mind, Naruto took a moment to look around. He seemed to be in an alley of some kind, though it was several times bigger than any alleyway he had seen in Konoha. The buildings on either side of him seemed to stretch high into the night sky, so much so that he could barely see the tops. He was surrounded by large metal boxes, the source of the foul smell, and, at the end of the alley, he could see countless people walking past without even a single glaze in his direction. Not that they would be able to see him, as he was at the far end of the alley, hidden in the shadows. Shuffling back a few feet so he could lean against the wall, Naruto let out a sigh and covered his eyes with his hand. He sat there for a few minutes, not moving an inch as he watched the people pass by outside the alley through his fingers. He could hear the voice in his head arguing with each other, but didn't bother trying to listen to them. He was confused enough as it was without trying to understand what they were all saying all at once. Then, out of nowhere, a chuckle escaped his lips. It wasn't an amused sound, nor was it a cruel one. More than anything, it sounded tired, like the world had collapsed around him, and this was the first chance he had to stop and think about it. Which is actually what happened. 3 hours earlier. Naruto was laying on his bed with a small frown on his face. The sky outside his window was dark and no one was on the street. The room around him looked like it had been hit by a tornado. The dresser was tipped over on its side, and all his clothes and random bits of paper were scattered on the floor, torn to pieces in a fit of rage. It had been a year and a half since he had dragged Sasuke back to the village. Sasuke had been slung over his shoulder, with minor wounds and a bump on his head. Whereas he was slowly bleeding out from the fist-size hole in his chest inches to the right of his heart. They had both been rushed to the hospital, and Tsunade had treated him personally. It was later found out, after Jiraiya examined the now completed cursed seal, that there had been a compulsion seal hiding in the seal matrix that was responsible for Sasuke trying to abandon the village. They couldn't remove the cursed seal completely, but the compulsion seal had been removed easily enough. Sasuke had gone back to being his usual broody self, though he did break character for a short time, just long enough to thank Naruto for stopping him and apologize for almost killing him. Naruto had responded with his usual grin, which got him a smirk and Sasuke throwing out a dope comment before walking off. A week after the retrieval mission, Sasuke and Sakura had started dating. It had broken the young blonde's heart when he heard, but like with everything else in his life, he put on his mask and smiled at them, congratulating them and joking about Sasuke getting an early start on rebuilding his clan. The only one that seemed to notice it was all faked was Iro-sanin. The white-haired man had been in the room with them when the new couple told him and had comforted Naruto after they left. He cried for the rest of the day, yet didn't make a sound. The next day, Jiraiya had taken Naruto out of the hospital. No one saw him for the next 6 months. When his friends asked Tsunade what had happened to him, all she would say was that he was on a training trip with Jiraiya and that he would be back when he had finished his training. When he came back, Naruto seemed exactly the same to all his friends, still hyper and loud. At first, they had questioned the blonde about what he had been doing for the past half a year. After he repeatedly refused to tell them anything, they gave up and things went back to normal. At least until now. On the bed next to Naruto was a small scroll, no bigger than the palm of his hand. He had found a small seal on the back of his neck a few hours ago. His training in Fuinjutsu with Jiraiya allowed him to identify it as a storage seal. The small scroll was actually another storage seal with another 2 large ones inside it that contained a library's worth of scrolls. There were scrolls on ninjutsu, fuinjutsu, kenjutsu, jinjutsu and a few scrolls with weapons of every kind imaginable, and even a few unimaginable, sealed inside them. But the thing that shocked him the most was the letter from his father, Minato Namikaze. My dearest son. I can't begin to tell you how sorry I am for what I am about to do. If I had any other choice, I would take it, but I cannot ask another parent to give up their child. I hope that you can forgive me for what has been done. If you are reading this, then you have just become a genin. I am so proud of you, and Saratobi has told you about the seal on the back of your neck. In these scrolls is all the knowledge that belongs to the Namikaze clan, several generations worth of information that we gathered over the years. The fact that I am dead means that you are the last of our clan, the others being wiped out during the Third Great War. I am sorry that you had to wait this long to find out that I am your father, but it was too dangerous for you to know. I made a lot of enemies in my life. If they found out you are my son before you could defend yourself, I don't want to think about the consequences, so until you are Jonin I ask that you keep it a secret while learning from these scrolls. I hope you have had a good life. I'm sure that the village has been spoiling you rotten. After all, you are the village's savior. If not for you, the Kyuubi would still be free. Hopefully, you haven't taken after Jiraiya. Just because he's your godfather doesn't mean you can become a pervert or a drunk like your godmother, Tsunade. I'm sorry that I don't have more to say. I am running out of time and need to prepare for the Kyuubi. Remember that both I and your mother love you so much. Love. Minato Namikaze. He had read the letter over and over again, burning the words into his memory. His hero, the man he once dreamed was his father, it was all his fault. The abuse, the beatings, the glares, the hate, it was all his fault. Yet despite that, he didn't hate the Yondaime for sealing the fox in him. He was right. What kind of man would he have been if he asked someone to do what he couldn't? If anything, Naruto respected him even more for that, being brave enough to give up everything for the village. It wasn't the fact that he had sealed Kyuubi in him that made him hate the man, it was his naivety. He had actually thought that Naruto would be seen as a hero after the fox had destroyed half the village and killed so many people. The thought made his blood boil. Then, there was the fact the letter said he was supposed to get the scrolls right after he had become a genin, an event that happened 2 years ago. The old man was supposed to tell him, but hadn't for reasons unknown. He didn't even want to think about his supposed godparents, Tsunade and Jiraiya. He couldn't help the feeling of betrayal. He hated this village. He hated the people in it. People said that Konoha was the best place to live in the elemental nations, that it was filled with the friendliest people, and the reason they were so strong was because of how they believed in teamwork and kindness, but that wasn't true. The people weren't friendly. They were spiteful creatures that hid behind a mask of kindness, well really that were no different than anyone else. It made him sick. Then leave. The familiar sound of the voice in the back of his mind was enough to break him out of his thoughts. Sitting up, his hair falling down over his eyes and covering them in shadow, Naruto took the small scroll and put it back into the seal on the back of his neck. Standing, he made his way to the door and left the apartment without looking back. As the side of the front gate came into view, Naruto saw the Chunin guard sending him a small glare. The street was completely silent as the young blonde made his way towards the gate, eyes still shadowed by his hair and his mouth set into a small frown. The man stepped forward, not even trying to hide his disdain at the sight of him. What the hell do you want, brat? Naruto just walked past him, as if he wasn't there, and continued towards the gate. Getting angry at being ignored by the demon brat, the Chunin made to grab the smaller boy's shoulder and turn him around. Hey, I'm talking to yo. He never finished his sentence. Just as he turned to face the older man, Naruto pulled a kunai out of his sleeve and stabbed it into the guard's stomach. Eyes going wide, the Chunin let out a straggled gasp as he fell to the ground, Naruto looming over him. Bending down so that he could get a good look at the man's face, the blonde genin spoke in a voice almost completely devoid of emotion, except for the simmering rage that could be heard bubbling under the surface. I remember you were always one of the ninja that chased us during the village's fox hunts. The guard's eyes widened even further at Naruto's words, fear becoming the most dominant emotion on his face. With a snort of disgust, Naruto turned his back on the man as he slowly bled and walked off into the trees that surrounded Konoha. It wasn't until after hours of running that Naruto heard the people coming up behind him. He had been running non-stop ever since he left the village. For a moment, he considered trying to outrun them, but realized that such a tactic wouldn't work. If they had caught up to him, then they would be able to catch him before long. Instead, he stopped on a branch and turned to face his pursuers. He didn't have to wait for long. Moments after he stopped, Naruto was met with the sight of Sasuke, Sakura, Lee, Hinata, Ino, Shikamaru and Kakashi stopping on the branches and looking at him with mixed expressions of shock and confusion. Stepping forward to address his wayward student, Kakashi raised his hands in the air to show that he wasn't armed. It was almost enough to make him laugh. Kakashi actually thought he was that stupid. Naruto, I don't know what happened, but you need to come back with us now so we can fix it. The guard at the gate is going to live. This doesn't have to go any further than it already has. Naruto just stared at them with a blank face, looking at each of them in turn before turning back to Kakashi. Something didn't seem right about his face. It was still Naruto, but something seemed to have changed in a way none of them could describe. Too bad. We should have just slit his throat and been done with it. The casual way in which Naruto said that was almost as shocking as the words themselves, and just like his face something about it just didn't seem like Naruto. Eyes widening slightly before settling on a look of apathy, Kakashi let his hands drop to his side. You're not Naruto. What's going on? Are you the fox? Are you controlling him? Shaking his head slightly, the young blonde leveled haunted eyes on his sensei. The fox? Is that the best you can come up with? You really don't know anything about us, do you? Letting out a tired sigh, Naruto looked at each of them with tired eyes that didn't look right on the normally energetic blonde's face. We've had enough. At the confused look on his sensei's face, Naruto let out a small, hollow chuckle. 13 years for 13 years, we've been the village's scapegoat for what the fox did. The beatings, the insults, and to know who our father was and that it's his fault. We just can't take it anymore. We're not going back. We are never going back to that hellhole. As he finished his speech, Naruto ripped off his headband and threw it towards the group and started to speed through hand signs as fast as he could. Before any of them could stop him, he let out a yell. Reverse summoning jutsu. Present time. After that, everything went black and he woke up here. Obviously, something had gone wrong with the jutsu. It was supposed to take him to the Toad Mountain, not wherever this was. At least he had gotten away from them. He didn't want to fight his old friends, not yet anyway. Getting to his feet, Naruto looked at his orange clothes, then at the people walking on the path at the end of the alley. After a moment, he nodded to himself. He took off his wet jacket and threw it in one of the large mental boxes, leaving him in a tight-fitting black shirt that showed just how shinny he was, and his orange pants. Letting out another sigh, Naruto made his way out of the alley toward the crowed street. Shortly after they had woken up, Kakashi and his team set up camp in a large empty warehouse near a river to try and figure out what had happened. He had no idea where they were, how they got here, or how to get back. Off in the distance, they could see a tower that seemed to have been made in an odd shape built on a small island in the middle of the bay. They were sat in a circle on the ground, facing each other, as Kakashi summed up what had happened so far. I have nothing. This caused the 5 genin sat around the white-haired man to face fault. After picking themselves back up, all eyes turned to Shikamaru, the shadow user being the best at analyzing situations on their current team. Troublesome. Whatever Naruto was trying to do obviously didn't work the way he had hoped, because I doubt he would have brought us along willingly. At least, I don't think he would by the way he was acting. Which is another reason to be concerned, because he wasn't acting anything like himself. From that, we can only assume that the jutsu wasn't supposed to bring us to wherever this place is. He probably made a mistake in his hand seals, which means he is as lost as us as to where we are. After a moment of silence, they all heard a snort and turned to Ino. Sure sounds like him. He can't even run away, right? Shut up, Ino. Whatever is going on, he is still our friend. Surprisingly, this came from Sasuke, who was leveling a hard glare at the blonde girl. Despite how he acted around people, Naruto included, Sasuke had a great respect for his blonde teammate. He had saved him from a fate worse than death and, even though he would never admit it, he would always feel indebted to the orange-wearing knucklehead for that. He also knew what was really going through Naruto's mind when they had told him about his and Sakura's relationship. He would admit that the blonde's mask was almost perfect, but he had seen the look in his eyes just before he put it on. Yet he had still put it on for their sake. But he stabbed a Chunin and ran away from the village. He's nothing more than a traitor now. Shooting to his feet in a moment of anger, Sasuke practically yelled at the purple-wearing Kunoichi. Is that what you think? Then what does that make me? I ran away from the village too, remember? But he didn't give up on me, and I'm not giving up on him. Calm down, Sasuke, nobody is giving up on Naruto. Ino, think carefully before you talk from now on. After the raven-haired boy sat back down and held his girlfriend's hand to try and calm down, Kakashi turned his attention back to Shikamaru. What do you suggest we do now? Raising an eyebrow at the older man, the lazy Nara let out a yawn. Why are you asking me? You're the team leader. And you're the team strategist. Troublesome. Well, I guess the first thing we need to do is gather information. Wherever we are, it doesn't match anything I've seen on the maps on the elemental nations. My dad had me memorize all of our maps. Also, from what I heard on our way here, I don't think we speak the same language. I'd say we get Ino to use her mind transfer jutsu on a few random people to try and learn what we can. Until then, we need to keep a low profile, nothing above what a civilian could do. Also, we can't look for Naruto yet. Seeing that they were about to argue with him, Shikamaru quickly continued. Until we know more about where we are, we can't risk doing anything that could draw the attention of the people here. We don't know anything about them and, for all we know, they could have ninjas stronger than even Kakashi. When we know more about this place, we can start looking for Naruto. After thinking about what he had said, they all fell silent, unable to argue with his logic. Letting out a sigh, Kakashi nodded his head. You're right. We'll put off the search until we know more about where we are. Tomorrow, Ino, Shikamaru and Hinata will go and gather whatever information they can. Don't be seen and, when you're done, you will directly come back here. Until then, sleep. I'll take first watch and after that I'll wake up Sasuke. It's been a long night and I get the feeling it's not going to get any better anytime soon. 3 years later. It had been 3 years since Naruto had first landed in Jump City and he could honestly say he had never been happier. After making his way out of the alley, he had wandered around for several hours. Eventually, he had come to a large old-look building that had turned out to be a library. The women at the front desk hadn't even spared him a glance as he walked in and, after looking for several hours, he had found a few books that he could read. After that, with the help of shadow clones and sneaking in at night, the young blonde had been able to learn a lot about where he was. The first thing being that he was definitely not in the elemental nations and that they didn't have ninja. What they did have, however, was enough to make him cautious. He didn't want to have to deal with the Justice League. Actually, he didn't want to have to deal with anyone. He was in a new world and, although they had wars, Naruto felt no need to fight. He still trained, knowing that there would come a time he would need to fight, but until that time came he was happy to just live a normal life. After finding someone that could set him up with fake papers so he could stay under the radar, Naruto began saving up money by using his clones, henjed into random people, to do jobs all around the city, mostly construction work. After 2 years, he had enough money to buy a small bookshop and still have a good sum left over. He was currently walking between the shelves, his arms full of books and a small smile on his face as he placed them in the right spot, nodding his head to several customers as he passed them. One of the first things Naruto had done after getting money was to buy new clothes to help him fit in. He could honestly say that he didn't miss his old Kill Me Orange, and the fact people would actually sell him what he wanted just made him more angry at his treatment at the hands of Konoha and the fact that he had let them get away with it. He now wore a black jacket over the top of a red t-shirt, a pair of tight-fitting blue jeans and simple black sneakers, along with a pair of black fingerless gloves with metal plates on the back of his hands and a light brown bucket hat on top of his head that shadowed his eyes slightly. He had let his hair grow out a little, just enough to slightly cover his eyes. He wasn't malnourished anymore and had grown to 6'1". After 3 years of proper eating and training, his body had filled out. While he wasn't bulging with muscles like the bodybuilders he had seen around the city, he wasn't skinny and it was easy to see his muscles through his shirt. At the time he bought the shop, he had laughed. If his friends could see him now, the dope actually willingly being around books, he could almost see the looks on their faces. What does it matter what they would think? It's not like they really cared about you. They were the same as everyone else in that god-forsaken village. Letting out a sigh at hearing one of the familiar voices in his head, Naruto made sure not to react too much to it. For years now, he had heard the voices in the back of his head. 7, to be exact. When he had asked them who they were, all they would tell him was that they were him, just different parts of him. There was Sloth, who for all intents and purposes was smart but lazy like Shikamaru, Pride, who would always tell him to fight anyone that dared disrespect him, Gluttony, who just wanted to eat all the time, Greed, Envy, Lust, and the ever-present Wrath. It was actually because of wrath that he had stabbed the guard at the gate and said what he had to Kakashi. He had been so angry that the dark voice had gained influence over him. Not enough to outright kill someone, but enough to affect his willingness to hurt people. Despite that, and how annoying it was to have several extra voices in his head, Naruto didn't think any of them were evil, despite how they seeming to represent the 7 deadly sins. They all just worried about him, even Wrath, and in a way were all his friends. Not now, Wrath. I'm working. Besides, it doesn't matter anymore. I'm here and they're not. He didn't say anything after that, simply humming to himself quietly as he made his way around the shop, a happy smile on his face. As she made her way down the street towards her favorite tea shop, Raven could be heard grumbling under her breath about stupid green loudmouths and cocky robots. She didn't know why she put up with them sometimes. Shaking her head to clear her thoughts, the gray-skinned girl took several deep breaths in an attempt to calm herself. It wouldn't be good if her emotions got the better of her and she destroyed something by accident. She ignored the people staring at her. Being used to it. If anything, she had it the easiest out of all her friends. Because of her dark personality and looks, not many people would approach her, despite her popularity as a teen titan. She remembered when Robin had been mobbed by his fans and dragged off. It had taken them an hour to find him, and whatever they did was still enough to make the boy wonder curl up into a ball and mutter about demon fangirls at the mention of it. It was just as she was passing by a small bookstore that she didn't recognize that her thoughts were interrupted by a man in a business suit being thrown out of the door, followed shortly by a shout to stay out. Turning from the downed man to the door he was thrown through, Raven got a curious look on her face and walked towards the shop. The shop was actually bigger than she had thought it would be from the outside. It was nice. Several bookshelves with all different genres were set up, and set in a corner of the room at the back was a small spiral staircase leading up to a balcony overlooking the store, with some chairs and desks for people to sit while they read. Hanging from the room in several places were security cameras, strategically placed around the shop so that nowhere was left unwatched. She could see 3 different people sitting at one of the desks near the railing of the balcony, poring over an old leather-bound book that looked so old Raven thought it might belong in a museum. She could see that they were all wearing rubber gloves and looked to be taking notes. Slowly making her way around the shop, stopping at random places to look at the shelves, Raven soon found herself up on the balcony. Her eyes were soon drawn to the glass cases, set up in the place of bookshelves on this level. Each case had 3 books inside, except for one that only had 2 and a blank space in between them. Walking over to inspect one of the cases, she felt her eyes widen. In the case she had walked up to were 3 old books, not unlike the one she had seen the other people looking at before, bound in old worn leather. They were perfectly preserved and set on pillows of crimson velvet. But it wasn't the decorations that had really caught her eyes. What shocked her was the fact she recognized them as spell and occult books, particularly rare ones that must have been worth a small fortune each. Raven had actually been trying to find one of these books in particular for several years now. Which begged the question, what were they doing in a small bookshop in Jump City? Beautiful, aren't they? Suppressing her surprise at the sudden and unexpected voice of the person who stood next to her, the gray-skinned teen moved her eyes to look at the blonde boy on her right. He didn't look any older than her, 16 at the most, but the way he was built gave him a slightly older look. He had blonde hair under a brown bucket hat. Both of his cheeks had 3 whisker-like birthmarks, and his eyes were some of the brightest blue she had ever seen. Fighting down the small blush that was starting to appear on her face at the sight of the cute blonde, Raven turned her eyes back to the books as the blonde opened his mouth once more. Not many people can appreciate books like these. They are beautiful, though I wonder how such a small shop came to possess them. That tome on the right alone is easily worth over $15,000. Well, actually, I found it 8 months ago in an online auction. The poor man didn't even know what he had. Turning to look at the boy again, Raven let a little bit of surprise enter her voice. You own this book? The small smile that appeared on his face was almost enough to make her lose the battle against her blush. Actually, I own all of them. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. I own this store. Accepting the offered hand, Raven shook it while giving her own name. Raven. When she told him her name, another smile came to Naruto's lips and he gestured towards the book. Well, Raven-san, would you like to have a look? To say she was shocked at his words would be an understatement. Here was a boy she had just met, offering to let her look through a $12,000 book like someone would ask about the weather. Are you sure that's okay? I mean, you paid a lot of money for it. Reaching into his pocket, Naruto put on a pair of rubber gloves, pulled a small key on a chain from around his neck and unlocked the display case with a small chuckle. Pulling out the book, he walked over to one of the desks at the balcony of the room, Raven right behind him. I don't mind. After all, what's the point of having a book if you never read it, especially one as special as this? Normally, I would charge you for it. But since you seem to be one of the few that actually knows what it is, I think I can make an exception just this once. The fact that you're cute doesn't hurt. This time she did blush, but thankfully he had his back turned to her so he couldn't see it. Taking the empty seat next to the blonde and taking the gloves he gave her, she started to flip through the book. Raven soon found herself lost in its pages. 3 hours later, she didn't even realize that she had been sitting there reading for hours on end and probably would have continued to do so if not for Naruto tapping her on the shoulder, telling her it was closing time. She hadn't even noticed that they were the last 2 in the shop. After watching the boy lock the book back in its display case, she suddenly realized that she had forgotten about the man being thrown out just as she had been passing by. Before I go, I was wondering something. And what's that? The reason I came in here in the first place was because I saw a man being literally thrown out as I was passing by. Why was that? Taking a moment to think, Naruto continued walking around the now deserted shop, making sure everything was where it should be. You must mean Mr. Gold. He's a private collector and has been after a lot of my collection for a while now. He didn't want to take no for an answer, so I threw him out. Raising an eyebrow at the casual way he talked about it, Raven couldn't help the slight amusement in her voice. Just like that. People like him think that just because they have money means they can get whatever they want. He didn't want my books so he could read them. He wanted them so no one else could have them. She could see the logic in that. Most people that collected books would never actually open them, or let anyone else for that matter. It seemed Naruto was one of the rare ones few that didn't mind letting others read his books at least as long as they paid. After that, she left for the tower, telling him she would be back to see more of his books. Naruto's answer to that had been a charming smile and a promise that if she played her cards right, he would let her see whatever she wanted. The double meaning in his words left her with a blush on her face that lasted all the way until the next day. Chapter 2 The Titians. After Raven had left, Naruto locked the door and, after one last check to make sure everything was in its right place, moved to the back of the store and through a door behind the counter. On the other side of the door was a small corridor with light blue paint on the walls and 2 doors on either side leading to a bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, and living room of the house part of his store. Ignoring the rooms, Naruto walked straight to the end of the corridor and after biting his thumb smeared his blood across the wall in a small circle. Taking a step back, he watched as a ceiling matrix spread across the wall before a flash of blue light blinded him for a moment. When his eyes recovered, the wall was gone and in front of him was a staircase leading down underground. Walking forward, he paused to smear more blood on another seal on the wall to his right. After the wall flashed back into place behind him, he continued on his way. 15 minutes later, he came to the bottom of the stairs only for them to end at another wall that vanished like the one at the top when he smeared some blood on it. Again sealing the wall behind him, Naruto turned to look around at the large cave-like room that had been carved into a circle with 11 doors lining the walls, each leading to different places. This was where he lived, having had his clones dig it out and shape it with earth jutsu shortly after buying the store. The rooms upstairs were a dummy home, a proxy to use if he ever had anyone visit, which hadn't happened so far, or in case someone broke into the shop. It was actually because of the space under it that Naruto had brought the particular building to use as his bookstore. Most of the space under the city was occupied by sewers. All except this single lot. The stairs that lead down to this room were in a thin, straight line leading down between the sewer tunnels. The room he was in right now was approximately 200 feet below the lowest of the sewer pipes. The door to his immediate right was his first library, which contained most of the rarest books he had acquired from this world, many of which he had found could be quite dangerous if left in the wrong hands. One of the things he found out about this world was that, even though they didn't have jutsu or chakra, they did have was magic. The books he had gathered in this room were almost all spell books that, if history was right, were dangerous and had a rather bloody history to go with them. Even if he was trying to stay neutral in this world for as long as he could, Naruto couldn't help but interfere a little, even if all he did was keep the books locked up so others couldn't use them. Next to that was another library with all the scrolls he had brought with him from the elemental nations, retrieved from the scroll his father had left him. Third in the lineup of rooms was his seal library study, where he made and stored all his seals. Then he had a corridor that led to 10 different bedrooms, including his own, with a small bathroom for each. None of them but his room had ever been used and probably never would be, but he liked to be prepared anyway. The next 2 rooms after that were his kitchen and pantry storeroom, respectively, and the 3 rooms after that were training rooms, each with a different terrain set up for practice in, and each the size of a small village back in his world, where he would have thousands of clones training each day in different jutsu and combat styles. The last 2 rooms were his gym and living room, both filled with the best equipment that money could buy. After his clones had spent 2 years gathering money from all the jobs they had done, he had saved up quite a lot of money. A sum which had only increased after he started dealing in rare books. Even if he kept most of them sealed in his library for safekeeping so they wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, the ones he did sell and rent always made a good profit. God bless shadow clones. Deciding to skip his evening workout for once, Naruto went straight to his living room, sat on the couch and turned on his 52-inch plasma flat-screen TV. Letting out a sigh, he leaned back and watched the news, thinking about the gray-skinned girl he had just met. He had to admit, he wasn't expecting one of the Teen Titans to walk into his shop. The blonde may not have said anything to her about it and even acted like he didn't know, but he knew who she was the moment she had stepped into the store. He also knew that she was one of the people he was keeping his true collection away from. It was true Raven was a good guy, using her powers to fight crime and all that, but the fact was that power could corrupt the purest souls. The most innocent child in the world could be drawn into darkness if given too much power, and Naruto didn't want to risk that happening. Not to say he wouldn't flirt with her, even if it was mostly because lust promised to give him wet dreams for the next month if he didn't, something he had found was actually within the voice's power to do after the first time he had refused to flirt with a girl he had met at a club. He hadn't lied when he said she was cute, and the blush that crossed her face when he had said it made her all the more so. Even if she didn't realize he had seen the redness on her cheeks, the blonde had to admit it made her seem even more beautiful. The tight black leotard didn't hurt either. Coming out of his thoughts just in time to see a video clip of the Titans fighting what looked like a large stone statue on the news, Naruto let out another sigh, turned the TV off and went to bed. Raven was on her way to Naruto's bookstore. It had been 2 days since she had first stepped through the door. Her delay had been caused by having to help her friends deal with several criminals, with this being the only free time she'd had since her first visit. The gray-skinned girl had been a bit disappointed when she read the sign on the door, saying it wouldn't open for another hour, but decided to go and get a cup of tea while he waited. When she arrived at her usual place, Raven was surprised to see the blonde that had been on her mind for the past 2 days drinking tea in the corner of the room farthest from the door with a book in his hand. Deciding to go and sit with him, she ordered her usual and moved to take the seat across from him. Naruto was sitting at a table in a small tea shop down the street from his own store. It was the only place he could find that sold Japanese-style tea, which he had found held the most similarities between his world and this one. He was sitting on his own at a table near the back of the store in the corner of the room, a book in one hand and a cup of green tea in the other. This was where Naruto always sat when he came here. When a shop waitress had asked him why he always asked for that table, he just said he liked having a wall to his back and then asked for his tea. Even on a world as peaceful as this, at least when compared his, some habits were just too hard to give up. Without looking up from his book, Naruto let a small smile form on his face as he felt a person he recognized take the chair across from him and sit down with their own tea in hand. "The pleasure, Raven-san. To what do I owe the pleasure of such beautiful company?" Blushing at the compliment, Raven took a sip of her tea to calm herself before answering. "I was on my way to your shop when I saw the closed sign and decided to come in here for a drink before you opened the store. I was surprised to see you here, through. I come here regularly and this is the first time I've seen you." Nodding his head absently, still not looking up from his book, Naruto took another sip. "I usually come here in the mornings for a cup of green tea. I find it helps calm the nerves for the day ahead. Maybe we just always missed each other, or it could be something as simple as you weren't looking for me." Nodding her head at the explanation, the gray-skinned teen sat back in her chair and drank her tea, eyes straying back to the blonde sat across from her every few minutes before quickly looking somewhere else. They had been sat there for another 10 minutes before Naruto put his book down and smiled at her as he finished his tea. "So I take it that you wanted to see another of my books, seeing as you said that you were at my store." It wasn't a question, but Raven still answered. "Yes, I remembered you saying you normally charge, so I brought money this time. I remember seeing several books that caught my eye in your collection." Chuckling quietly, Naruto put his empty cup on the table. "I don't want your money, Raven-san. You can look at them anytime you want and all you have to do is ask." "I can't do that, it wouldn't be right." "Then think of it as my way of saying thank you for all you do for the city. Plus, if people see a pretty girl like you in my shop, I might get more customers." After giving the girl a wink, enjoying the small blush that the simple action brought to her cheeks, they left the tea shop and made their way down the street to his store. For the next month, Raven would often be found at the small bookstore whenever she wasn't saving the city with her friends. She would spend hours reading the books he showed her, while Naruto himself would move around his shop like normal, seeing to his customers and restocking the shelves. Raven would also go to the tea shop at the same time every morning and have a cup of tea with the blonde. They would talk, discuss books, then go to his store where she would read while he set up for the day. Naruto had made a habit of teasing her every time they talked, seeming to take joy from the fact he was probably one of the only people to ever make her blush. She had been spending so much time with him over the last month that her friends had started to notice her absence. For the most part, they wanted to respect her privacy, but after a month of her hardly being around, even the Robin was starting to get curious. Robin, Beast Boy, Cyborg and Starfire were all sitting in the common room eating breakfast when Raven walked in. "I'm going out, I'll be back later. If you need me, call." Turning to leave the room, she was stopped by a call from her brightly dressed leader. Raven looked over at him with a small frown on her face. Putting down his bowl of cereal, Robin stood up and walked over to his gray-skinned friend, the eyes of the others following him the whole time. "What's with you lately? You're hardly ever here and the most time we've spent together is on missions." Leveling a blank look at the Titan's leader, Raven let her voice go completely natural as she spoke. "What I do outside of missions is none of your business. Leave me alone." At her words, the others moved to stand with Robin and looked at her with worried faces. Floating in the air next to Raven, Starfire put her hand on the dark girl's shoulder to get her attention. "Please, friend Raven, do not be like that. We are just worried for you." Plastering a big smile on his face, BB moved to stand on her other side. "Like yeah, we hardly even see you anymore. Where'd you go all the time?" Letting out a small growl, Raven turned her back on her friends and disappeared into her aura. Shaking his head and letting out a sigh, Robin moved over to his computer and started typing. As he was doing this, Cyborg came up behind him and looked over his shoulder, frowning when he saw Raven's tracking signal from her communicator on the screen. "You know, if she finds out you're tracking her, she'll kill you, right?" "I know, but something's not right and this is the only way to find out what." By using the tracker in Raven's communicator, they were able to follow her signal to a small bookstore not far from where they knew her favorite tea shop was located. It didn't look like much from outside and didn't even have a name, just a sign announcing it as a bookstore. Looking from his communicator, which showed a small red dot indicating that she was inside, to the front door, Robin hesitated for a moment. If they walked through that door, there would be no going back. It was a huge violation of Raven's privacy and, if she found out about it, which she most likely would, he wasn't sure if Raven would forgive them for it. Walking up to the smaller boy and putting a hand on his shoulder, Cyborg looked at the door with a worried expression. "You sure about this, Rob?" Letting out a sigh, Robin steeled his nerve and walked through the door without answering the mechanical teen. Starfire and Beast Boy entered right behind him, a still worried Cyborg trailing after them. The moment they entered his store, Naruto knew his day, if not his new life, had just gotten a lot harder. He was at the counter giving a customer their change when he heard the small bell above the door ring. He looked up to see the Teen Titans, minus Raven because she was already here. It was obvious they were looking for her from the way they seemed to be scanning the room, hardly even sparing a glance at the books. When he was done with the customer, the blonde teen let out a sigh and made his way over to the group of heroes who still hadn't noticed the balcony overlooking the store. Not that they would have even seen Raven if they did without going up. The gray-skinned girl always sat at the same table in the back, so she was less likely to be bothered. Deciding to address Robin, seeing as he was the leader, Naruto put a smile on his face and held out his hand. "Hello, my name is Naruto. Welcome to my store. Is there anything in particular I can help you find?" Looking at the offered hand for a moment as if to make sure he didn't have a weapon, Robin smiled back and took it in a firm handshake before introducing himself and the others with him. "Hey, I'm Robin. This is Starfire, Beast Boy and Cyborg. We're actually here looking for our friend. Maybe you've seen her. Blue cloak, gray skin, kind of quiet." Pretending to think about it for a minute, Naruto brought his hand up to his chin in a thinking pose before nodding his head. "You must mean Raven-chan. I can get her if you want, or I should just take you to her." Smiling, Robin gestured for the taller boy to lead the way. They followed him to the set of spiral stairs that lead to the balcony. As they came to the top, Naruto turned to the group and pointed towards the glass display cases around the room. "I'm afraid I must ask you not to touch anything. All of the books up here are extremely valuable, and I would hate to have to charge you if any were damaged." At his words, both Beast Boy and Starfire gave nervous chuckles while scratching the backs of their heads before walking back to stand with Robin and Cyborg. All of them were careful not to touch anything and keep their hands at their sides. Raising an eyebrow at the blonde, Robin walked over to one of the displays and looked at what seemed to be an old book open to a random page with slightly faded lettering. Turning back to Naruto, he let his curiosity get the better of him. "When you say valuable?" Walking over to stand next to him, Naruto took a look at the book he had been looking at and smiled. "That book, the one you were looking at a moment ago, is worth over $18,000 alone." Eyes widening slightly at his words, Robin backed away from the case slowly and looked around the room. It didn't take him long to spot Raven sitting at the back with a pair of rubber gloves on her hands and an old leather-bound book on the table in front of her. She was so focused on her reading that she didn't even notice as Robin and the others came up behind her and looked over her shoulder at the book. Shaking his head at their antics, Naruto walked up to the table and coughed, smiling when the gray-skinned girl instantly looked up at him. Without saying a word, he pointed for her turn around and tried to suppress his laughter at the shocked expression on her face when she saw her friends. Unfortunately, her shock didn't last long and quickly changed to anger, shortly followed by a chair at another table suddenly flying across the room and smashing into a wall at high speeds and shattering. "What the hell are you guys doing here? I told you to leave me alone." Quickly stepping between the now scared teens and angry girl, Naruto raised his hands as a peaceful gesture to get her attention. "I can understand you are angry, Raven-chan, but I must ask you to calm down before you break anything else." Taking deep breaths, the gray-skinned titan slowly calmed herself down before nodding her thanks to Naruto and looking to her friends with a slightly annoyed look. "Why are you here? Are you spying on me now?" Floating over in front of her friend, Starfire let a big smile cross her face, oblivious to the situation at hand. "Indeed we did, friend Raven, and because of that we were able to find you, is it not glorious?" Raising an eyebrow at the odd way the girl spoke, Naruto excused himself for a moment and went back down the stairs. He could hear them arguing, something about them not trusting her and Raven them, but for the most part he didn't really care. It was their problem, not his. Walking through the shelves until he found the book he was looking for, Naruto returned to find Robin and Raven still arguing. It looked like Raven was about ready to lose her temper again, so he decided to interrupt with another cough. When he had their attention, the blonde walked up to the alien girl still floating in the air and held out a small book for her to take. When he saw the confused look on her face, he smiled gently and explained. "It's a book on the English language. I thought it might be useful for you. It helped me a lot when I was learning." Forgetting their argument for the moment, Robin walked over and looked at the book with a curious expression before raising an unseen eyebrow at Naruto, who was trying not to laugh at the way his mask seemed to move with it. I thought I recognized your accent. Japanese, right? That's right, you speak. Not really, I just remembered you adding Chan to the end of Raven's name before. So how long have you been in America? About 3 years, I lived in a small village in a not well-known region. As they talked, Naruto moved over to the table Raven had been sitting at before and locked the book back in its display case. It was as he was doing this that a middle-aged man in an expensive-looking business suit came walking up the stairs with another larger man with a pair of dark sunglasses and a shaved head. It took her a moment, but Raven recognized the smaller of the two as the man she had seen being thrown out of the store the first time she came here, Mr. Gold. He had long dark brown hair tied into a small ponytail and a smirk on his face as his eyes fixed on Naruto. He walked with a cane and barely spared the others in the room a glance as he made his way over to the blonde, the large man only a few steps behind him. Mr. Uzumaki. I was hoping you might reconsider the offer I made you last month. Many of the books you possess are extremely valuable and shouldn't be handled by just anyone. Raising an eyebrow at the slightly shorter man and sending a quick glance toward the larger one standing behind him, Naruto seemed to be thinking about it for a moment before he turned away from the both of them in a dismissive way to look at one of the display cases absent-mindedly. As I told you before, Gold-san, I have no interest in selling any of my collection to you. If that is the only reason you have come here, then I am afraid you've wasted a journey. Now, I think you should leave. The smug look that had been on the older man's face quickly dropped and he practically snarled. Looking to the man behind him and nodding his head, Mr. Gold turned back to the blonde. I had hoped you would see reason, but if money will not sway you, then maybe this will. Walking up so he was stood next to the smaller boy, the larger man reached into his jacket and pulled out a gun, aiming it right at Naruto's head, with only about 3 inches between his skull and the barrel. The others stood frozen for a moment, shocked at the open display of violence. Walking over to the blonde with his smirk back in place, Mr. Gold leaned in, so he was only a few inches away from his whiskered face. Not so tough now, are you? Just as Naruto was about to knock the gun out of the thug's hand, it was covered in a black glow just before being thrown across the room. Without thinking, the large man tried to follow his weapon and didn't even notice Robin pulling out a small pole from his belt, which then turned into a bow staff. He didn't make it more 3 feet before the staff slammed into his stomach, leaving him winded and gasping on the floor. Robin put his staff away and leveled a hard glare at the now cowering Mr. Gold. Naruto is right, it's time for you to leave. At the teen's words, the middle-aged man quickly ran down the stairs and out of the door, the still slightly winded thug not far behind. Turning to the 4 teens with a smile on his face, Naruto nodded his head to the group and made his way over. Thank you for that. Some people don't know when no means no. Casting one last look towards the door where he had last seen the 2 men before they left, Robin walked over to where the gun had been left on the ground and picked it up, a small frown on his face. He looked from the small weapon to Naruto, taking in the blonde's reaction to what had just happened, and narrowed his eyes slightly. Is this normal for you, being held at gunpoint I mean? Shrugging his shoulders, Naruto made his way back down the stairs to deal with a customer waiting at the counter, the Titians following. Not really, but it's not the first time. People can get a little crazy about books, especially rare ones. Looking at the blonde with wide eyes, Beast Boy couldn't help but express his opinion about that. Dude, that's so cool. Giving the man at the counter his change with a small chuckle, Naruto just shrugged off his words and smiled at them. This, coming from a hero. Giving a large sheepish grin while rubbing the back of his head, the green teen moved away from the group to look for a book on animals, hoping to find something new he might be able to change into, with Cyborg going off to look for a book on mechanics, since he was in a bookstore anyway. Starfire followed him as she floated through the air reading the book Naruto had given her. But the others gone, Raven turned her attention back to Robin and let a small frown cross her lips. How did you find me here anyway? Both the blonde and purple-haired teens could see the brightly dressed boy begin to sweat under their curious gazes before he seemed to have an idea. We went to look for you at the tea shop, but when we couldn't find you there, we decided to look around. Before she had time to question him on his answer, Raven was interrupted by Naruto chuckling. You're not a very good liar, are you, Traffic Light-san? Traffic Light? Robin, how did you find me here? Looking down with a defeated look on his face, the boy wonder let out a sigh of resignation. We used a tracker in your communicator. Across the room, several books started flying off the shelves and fell into piles on the floor. You what? Backing away slightly from the clearly upset Raven, Robin soon found his back against a wall with nowhere to go. We were worried about you. For the last month, you've been acting strangely and whenever any of us tried to ask you about it, you'd teleport away like you did this morning. I told you it was none of your business. What I do in my spare time is my own responsibility. You had no right to do this. As their arguments started getting more and more heated, the other titans could be seen poking their heads out from behind the shelves to watch what was happening, while keeping a good distance so they wouldn't be caught in the crossfire. As this was going on, Naruto walked over to the piles of books on the floor and calmly started putting them back into their rightful places, seeming not to notice the fight going on in his store. After all the books were back in order, the blonde teen walked back and stood to the side for a moment, watching the two with an amused look on his face, before coughing into his hand to get their attention. As cute as you are when angry, Raven-chan, I would appreciate it if you not do this here. I'm not sure how much more my store can take. It was at this point, something happened that left Robin, Starfire, Beast Boy and Cyborg in a state of shock. Something they had never seen happen in all the years they had known the gray-skinned girl. There, right before their eyes, was a blushing Raven. All the titans were gathered in the common room in the tower, the large couch occupied by Beast Boy, Cyborg and Starfire, as they watched the fight still going on between the other two members of their team. However, unlike the one they had been having while at Naruto's bookstore, this one wasn't about Robin not respecting Raven's privacy. You should have told us you had a boyfriend. What if he's an enemy? Letting out a growl for what seemed like the millionth time, the gray-skinned girl leaned forward so she was only inches away from the boy wonder's face. For the last time, he's not my boyfriend. We're just friends. You still should have said something. Now we need to do a background check on him. No, you don't. You don't need to know everything about everyone, Robin. You saw what happened. He didn't even bat an eye when that gun was inches away from his head. No matter how much he tried to brush it off, normal people don't do that. If you keep acting like this, it will cost you friends. Starting with me. Her words seemed enough to shock the brightly dressed boy out of his anger as he stared at the girl with wide eyes for a moment before she turned her back to him and stormed off. His shock soon turned back to anger. Robin turned to face his other friends, crossed his arms over his chest and pouted slightly. What's her problem? Scowling at the smaller boy, Cyborg shook his head. Not this time, Rob. I'm not backing you up on this. I told you not to do it. You went too far this time. We all have a right to a personal life. Not you too. Come on Star, BB, you agree with me, right? I was just trying to protect the team. When he saw that neither of them could meet his eye, Robin seemed to visibly deflate. Letting out a sigh, he sank into the armchair next to the couch and ran a hand over his face. I made a mess of things again, didn't I? Back at Naruto's, the blonde was in the middle of his daily workout. When he had first finished his underground home, he had made sure to make a room specifically for physical training and filled it with all the latest workout equipment he could find. His workout consisted of 300 sit-ups and push-ups, 300 pull-ups and stomach crunches, weightlifting, and a 10-mile run on his treadmill. After that, he would increase the weight seals on his arms and legs and do 300 kicks and punches for each arm and leg before practicing the katas that his clones had learned for an hour. It would normally take him around 3 hours to finish the whole workout and, after a few minutes of heavy breathing, it would be as if he hadn't even done anything. As he finished his punches and moved on to kicks, sweat poured down his face as the sound of his music blasted around the room from the speakers mounted on the wall. The song was called Pump It by a band called the Black Eyed Peas and he often listened to it when doing his workout because of the fast pace. He couldn't help but think about what had happened that day. He had known the first time he saw her that Raven would undoubtedly complicate his new life when she had walked through his door. The fact that she was a teen titan made it inevitable that the others would find out about him when she spent so much time reading through the books he had on display in the store. The whole incident with Mr. Gold had just made it worse. He had seen the look in Robin's eyes after the two men had left. They had been calculating, as if he was looking at a particularly interesting frog, just before slicing open its stomach with a scalpel. The leader knew something was different about him, and if Naruto had done his homework on the walking traffic light, it wouldn't be long before he did a background check on him. He wasn't too worried, the papers he had acquired were almost perfect, and most professionals wouldn't be able to tell they were all fakes. But nothing was ever completely foolproof. All it would take is one bit of information that didn't add up, and he was sure Robin would have him in an integration room the first chance he got. Well, he would try at least. You should just take care of them all now before he gets the chance. That's enough out of you, Wrath. Go crawl back into your hole and mope. Naruto could hear mumble in the back of his head for a moment before everything went quiet again. Sending a silent thank you to Lust for shutting the irritable Sin up, he worried, as always, that Lust seemed to be the voice of reason more often than not out of the seven of them. Shaking his head to try and clear it, he focused back on his workout. When he had finished, the blonde had a shower and made himself a quick dinner before moving to his seal study and looking through his notes on the flying thunder god jutsu his father had created. As much as he hated the man, Naruto couldn't help but admire his skill. The jutsu was a true masterpiece, nothing he had seen in the other scrolls could compare to it in combat ability. He had actually finished learning it 4 months ago, with the use of shadow clones, of course, and had decided to try and improve it. Spending hours at a time poring over different ceiling matrix and jutsu theory, he had come up with several ideas. After whittling them down to the most likely to work, he had come up with the idea of combining the Flaying Thunder God with a simple body flicker jutsu. He was hoping that when he was finished it would have the speed of the Thunder God and the range and ease of use of the body flicker. After another hour of studying, Naruto let out a sigh, running a hand over his face and standing from his desk. He couldn't focus with his head full of what had happened with the Titans, and he didn't want to make a mistake because he was only paying half his attention to his work. Putting his research back in its place in a small safe hidden behind one of the shelves filled with scrolls, the blonde made his way to his room and turned in for the night. As his eyes started to close, he couldn't help the grin that spread across his face when he thought about the Titans' reaction when they realized just what was in the book he had given to Starfire. Every Monday and Wednesday Naruto would have a day off from running the store and just leave it closed. He would use these days to shop, read, train, and research his seals. It was one of the only times, apart from his trips to the tea shop every morning, that he actually left the building. He would go to a club on occasion or walk around the park just to stop himself from going stir crazy, but for the most part, he liked to stay out of the public eye as much as possible. But today was different. The day before, Raven had come to him at the end of the day and invited him to come and see her own book collection as a thank you for letting her see his. He had been reluctant at first, not just for the fact that she lived in a giant tea built on an island in the middle of the river, leaving it completely open to attack, but also because if he was seen in or around the Titan Tower, it would most likely end up on the news. If that happened, he could say goodbye to his peaceful new life. In the end, there were 3 reasons that made him agree to come. 1. He couldn't resist the chance to see the books. 2. It would probably make the traffic light more suspicious. And 3. As much as he didn't want to admit it, he really did like spending time with Raven. The blonde knew it was a stupid risk, but he couldn't help the way he felt. He still wasn't sure if he liked her as more than a friend and wasn't completely sure he wanted to see her in that manner. He may enjoy teasing her, and when she would give him one of her rare smiles, he couldn't help but smile back, but a relationship with her would destroy everything he had done up to now to have a normal life. They had met up at their usual table in the tea shop at the same time they always did, talking for a while and then leaving. When they were outside, Raven had placed her hands on his shoulders, a large blush on her face, and used her aura to transport them just outside the tower. It had been a strange feeling, like being plunged into cold water and, even though he had recovered instantly, the blonde had made a show of wobbling on his feet for several minutes after they reappeared. He had seen the cameras pointed towards them and was sure Robin would be watching every move he made. Taking a deep breath to steel his nerves, Naruto let Raven lead him into the tower, fixing a small smile on his face as they went. Chapter 3 The Screaming Statue. If nothing else, Naruto had to admit that the tower was impressive. For one thing, even though only 5 teens lived in it, he couldn't see a speck of dust anywhere. He guessed that they must have had some kind of robot or something to clean, seeing as everything else seemed to be completely automatic. The doors opened on their own, the lights turned on by themselves, and he could have swore the security cameras were following his every move. Another thing he couldn't argue with was the view. Whenever they passed one of the many windows that covered the outside of the tower, he was treated to an impressive view of the city. Naruto was sure that it would be all the more impressive first thing in the morning, with the sunrise, and last thing in the day, when the sun set. They had been walking for about 5 minutes, Raven explaining things as they went, before coming to a stop in a large circular room that he guessed was a common room. He could see a big U-shaped couch that looked like it could seat 6, 2 armchairs on either side of it, and all of that facing a humongous TV. Set to the side of the room was a small kitchen, and several computers were scattered around the room. He could see Beast Boy and Cyborg sitting on the couch, playing a video game on the large green TV and yelling at each other as the green team seemed to be winning. Starfire was moving around the kitchen, humming happily to herself and mixing several random ingredients into a large pot on the stove, which Naruto could have sworn was growling. Robin sat to the side of the room, typing at one of the computers. It was a very open room, with a large window stretching across one of the walls with a perfect view of Jump City. Off to one side, he noticed a table with a photo on it of a cute blonde girl, and another next to it of the same girl stood with the Titans, smiling at the camera. Seeing both Raven and Naruto standing at the door, Starfire grinned happily at the two before rushing over and giving the blonde a bone-crushing huge, literally. Raven could have sworn she heard a few bones cracking under the strain. Friend Ravens, friend Naruto, it is fucking glorious to see you again. I hope you have been well. We have all been bloody brilliant since the last time we met. staring at the girl floating in front of him for a moment and noting the groans from the others in the room, including the brightly dressed titan slapping a hand to his head in a tired manner, the ex-ninja could only hold it in for about 10 seconds before he burst out laughing. Haha, it's good to see you to Star-san. I'm glad to see you have been reading that book I gave you. Nodding her head enthusiastically as the others walked over to join them, Starfire flew over to the other side of the room and back again with the book in her hands. Indeed, it has been bloody wonderful. I have been able to learn many new words from it like shit, fuck, hell, bloody hell and motherfucker. Naruto found it hard to believe that she was able to say all of that while still looking so innocent. You gave her a book on how to swear. Turning his attention to the boy wonder standing to his right with an annoyed expression on his face, Naruto smiled gently. So? Waving his arms in the air frantically, Beast Boy's voice went several octaves higher as he all but shouted. Dude, she hasn't stopped. Ever since she started reading that book, all she does is swear. I thought you said you used it when learning English. I did. It was most helpful in learning when someone was insulting me. After he said that, all the titans but Starfire, who didn't really understand what was going on, face faulted. Shaking her head, Raven grabbed the blonde's hand before the others had recovered, trying her hardest to hide the blush on her face, and pulled him out of the common room toward her own. Closing the door behind them, the blue-haired teen let out a sigh before turning to look at Naruto, only to see him looking around her room. Turning to look at her over his shoulder with a small smirk on his face, Naruto turned back to look at the bookcase next to her bed. Dragging a boy into your room so suddenly, I had no idea you were so daring, Raven-chan. He could practically feel the heat come off her face from across the room and was trying his hardest not to laugh at the poor girl's embarrassment. Taking another look around the room while he waited for Raven to pull herself together, he couldn't help but think just how much the room seemed to fit the teen. The windows were covered by thick black curtains, the only light in the room coming from a small lamp on her bedside table, and the walls were painted a dark blue that was as close to black as it could get. There wasn't much in the way of decoration. The only things in the room being her bed, a small desk, a bookshelf and a large ornamental mirror that was half covered by a sheet. He could see 2 doors other than the one they had come through and suspected they were her closet and bathroom. Walking over and sitting on her bed with an amused look on his face, the blonde winked at Raven, who was still stood by the door as if frozen in place. Shaking her head and sending a small glare at the now grinning Naruto sitting on her bed, Raven moved over to her bookcase. Pulling out several old-looking books, she moved to sit next to him, still blushing from his earlier words. They spent about 4 hours in Raven's room, just reading and talking about random things. Naruto was actually a little impressed by the books she had in her possession, not that they could really compare to his own. He was also glad to see that none of them were dangerous enough for him to consider stealing them to lock away in his library. He didn't want to do something like that to the girl. She had brought him here to show him her books, and the idea of taking any of them would have left a bad taste in his mouth. He would have done it if the need was there, but wouldn't have enjoyed it. It was while they were talking and reading that Naruto came to the conclusion that he did, indeed, like Raven. She was smart, beautiful and, when you got to know her, could be quite witty in her sarcastic remarks. He couldn't deny it to himself anymore. That still left him in a predicament. The fact was that, if they were to ever have a relationship, it would destroy everything he had done over the years to ensure a relatively normal life. What she did, and the fact that Titans were always in the public eye, meant if he was dating Raven, it would probably be all over the Jump City News in next to no time at all. But despite that, he couldn't stop the small voice in the back of his head that kept telling him it would be worth it. Then again, he never could shut lust up to begin with, so that wasn't really saying much. That was another thing he had learned about the 7 sins in his head. They not only represented the thing they were named after, but also any and all emotions and mindsets around it as well. Even then, he was only really able to understand lust and wrath, them being the easiest to understand. They were for the most part complete opposites, light and dark, happy and sad, yin and yang. Wrath stood for everything bad that had happened in his life and was the oldest of his voices as far as he could tell. It stood for anger and resentment, but also sadness and depression. It was a living, sort of, representation of the pain in his life. Every insult, every time he was attacked, every little thing that ever happened to him had gone into creating it. When looking back on his life, he couldn't say he was surprised that it was the first. Lust stood for everything good that had happened in his life and had been the last of the voices to appear. It had started talking to him around the time he first became a ninja. It was the happiest he had ever been before that time and, from what he could understand, that was what had created it. Love, caring, happiness and everything that went with it. Sloth was actually the second voice he had gained, for reasons he didn't really understand. The lazy voice represented his intelligence. It really did remind him of Shikamaru. Another thing he had discovered was that it also stood for acceptance. Sloth was the embodiment of accepting what life threw at someone. After sloth came envy, formed after watching how other kids lived with loving family and friends that cared about them. Gluttony had been born from his time on the streets, digging through the trash for the smallest scrap of food. Greed had arrived the first time he had been forced to hide something from other people when he didn't want to share, and pride, the first time he had done something right in the academy. Basically, he had 7 spilled personalities as a result of his crappy life in Konoha. After finishing looking through the last of her books, they stayed in the dark room for another half an hour before moving back to the common room to get something to eat. Just like the first time they had come to the room, the other titans were there. Beast Boy and Cyborg seemed to be arguing over what takeout they should get. Hearing the sigh that escaped Raven's lips, Naruto could only assume that this wasn't the first time they had had this particular fight. Looking over to the kitchen unit, the blonde made his way over to the fridge and started to look for anything he could use as ingredients. Raven followed with a curious look upon her face. When he started pulling things out and putting them on the counter, the other noticed the two in the room for the first time and watched as the blonde moved around the small kitchen like a professional, throwing away anything that had gone out of date as he sorted through what they had. An hour later, the sun had just started to set, bathing the city in a golden red glow, and the titans were all sitting around the dinner table as Naruto brought them the food he had cooked. With the exception of Beast Boy, who had a salad, he made them all steak dinners. After taking the first bite, Cyborg couldn't help the drawl that fell out of the corner of his mouth, even Robin couldn't help the satisfied sigh that escaped his lips at the taste. Looking at the blonde sitting across from him at the table, the mechanical teen grinned. "This is great, where'd you learn to cook like this?" Seeing the eyes of all the titans fixed on him, Naruto gave them a small smile as he finished his mouthful. "I'm an orphan. I needed to learn to take care of myself at a young age. Cooking was just one of the things I had to learn. Didn't you live in a home or something? It's complicated. Let's just say I've been on my own for a long time and leave it at that." Staring at him with a confused expression on her face, Starfire leaned forward to look at the blonde. "Excuse my lack of understanding, friend Naruto, but what the hell is an orphan?" Deciding to spare the blonde from having to explain, Robin turned to the alien girl who sat next to him. "An orphan is what humans call a child when they no longer have parents, Star." Letting out a gasp, she looked back to Naruto with tears in her eyes, surprising the ex-nin at the sudden mood changes she seemed to be having. He had just enough time to brace himself before she flew over and pulled him into yet another back-breaking hug. "But that is fucking terrible. To not have any family must be so sad." After a moment of struggling to get out of the death grip, Naruto gave the still crying girl an odd look. "Are you bipolar or something?" Shaking her head, Raven looked up from her meal and sighed. "She's a Tamaranian. Her people are almost completely ruled by their emotions." After that, they ate in silence, enjoying the meal Naruto had made. When they were done and the dishes were washed, the group moved to the couch. They spent some time talking, Beast Boy asking Naruto about his favorite video games and music while the others did their own thing. Robin had tried to ask him several questions about his past, but was always stopped by a glare from Raven, who had taken the seat next to her guest. It was getting late and Naruto was getting ready to leave when he decided to ask about the pictures he had seen earlier, the ones with the blonde girl in them. Walking over and picking up the picture of her and the other teens, he turned a quizzical eye to Raven. "I was wondering, who's this girl?" Looking at the photo in his hand, the room suddenly went deadly quiet and they all adopted sad looks on their faces. Surprisingly, it was Beast Boy who answered him in a serious voice that didn't really suit the green teen. "That's Terra, she was a good friend. There was an accident and she got turned into stone." Blinking at the boy in confusion, he saw Cyborg walk over to one of the computers. After typing for a moment, he brought up a live image of what looked like a statue of the girl he had seen in the photo. Turning to look at the blonde over his shoulder, Cyborg explained. "Terra had a problem. She had the ability to control Earth with her mind but wasn't able to control it. Because of that, she had a hard life and people chased her way from their towns in fear that she would cause earthquakes. We tried to help her, but we were too late. She made a deal with the wrong guy and ended up killing him, turning to stone in the process. She saved all our lives." Staring at the picture with an unreadable expression on his face, Robin took note that Naruto's hands had started shaking and his whole body seemed to have gone stiff. "Hated for something that wasn't her fault." The words were spoken so softly that they almost didn't hear them. Naruto's mind was going through a range of different emotions, most of them not good. Looking at the pictures on the screen and in his hand, he couldn't help but see his and Gaara's faces overlapping hers, as if they were taunting him. Of all the things he was expecting to hear, this was not one of them. A troubled young girl that had issues but died would have been sad, but not that big a deal. A girl that had lived a similar life he had and was now trapped in a prison of her own making, how was he supposed to ignore that? He could hear all 7 voices talking over each other in his head, clamoring over each other to be heard, talking at the same time. His head felt like it was splitting open, and the world around him seemed to be spinning, images of a mountain covered in large stone frogs flashing through his head. He could hear his own heart beating in his ears, banging the inside of his head like a drum. Grabbing the sides of his head and gritting his teeth, he looked at the live video again, right into the stone eyes of the statue. That was when he started to hear a girl screaming. It wasn't fair. All he wanted was a normal life. Why did this have to happen now? Seeing the others looking at him with worry in their eyes, he turned his back to the video, his right hand still clutching his head and his face scrunched up in pain. And just as soon as it started, the pain was gone, the spinning and the voices stopped, and he could once again think clearly. Letting out a breath, Naruto turned tired eyes to the worried faces of the Titans and forced a smile to form over his lips. I think it's time I go home. Looking to Robin for a moment as if to be sure it was okay, Raven stepped over to the blonde and rested a hand on his shoulder, and they both disappeared. Raven had them appear inside the store. The lack of light giving it an ominous feel to it as she watched Naruto stumbled for a moment before regaining his balance and leaning against one of the shelves. After taking a few deep breaths, the blonde smiled towards the blue-haired teen and let out a small chuckle. Well, I had a great time hanging out with you and your friends. We should do it again sometime. Are you okay? I'll be fine. I'm just a little tired. You should get back. After a moment of hesitation, Raven nodded her head and left without another word, using her aura to teleport back to the tower. Right after she left, Naruto seemed to shrink into himself slightly. He leaned back against the shelf for a moment to catch his breath before he made his way to his underground home. When he got there, he stopped with one hand on the door to his library where he kept the books from this world, taking a moment to think about what he was about to do and what might come from it. One of the first things he had learned when he had started collecting these books was that he was unable to use magic. From what he could understand, magic and chakra just weren't compatible. This was one of the reasons he had decided it was his duty to keep them locked away. He may be able to read and memorize them, but he could never use what he learned. The thing that worried him was that if he went through with what he was thinking, it would mean he might have to explain a few things to the Titans that he really didn't want to get into. Letting his mind stray back to the live video of the girl and the screaming in his head, Naruto steeled his nerves and smeared a little blood on the handle to open the door. The inside of the room looked more like a high-tech vault than it did a library, with bright fluorescent lights, steel-lined floors, walls covered in drawers, and a large box coved with more drawers, bolted down to the floor in the middle of the room. On the wall, just on the inside of the door, to his left was a security pad. Reaching over to the keypad, careful not to step on the floor, he typed in a 6-digit code. He watched as the floor flashed for a moment before bending down and wiping more blood on the ground 4 inches away from the doorframe. He watched as a large seal matrix came to life over the whole room with a blue glow. Waiting until it faded, he walked into the room and closed the door behind him. Naruto spent the next 2 weeks straight in that room, reading through book after book and taking notes on anything that might be relevant. Because of his healing ability, the blonde could go up to a month straight without food or water and, if needed, could get by with only an hour of sleep for every 3 days. It was an ability he couldn't help but associate with bad memories because they were all things he had discovered while he lived on the streets as a kid. He had done this because he was looking for anything he could find on Earth elementals, as they were called in this world. He had remembered seeing several references to them in a couple of his books when he had first acquired them before putting them into storage. He had been hoping to find a cure for the girl within his collection. It took him 2 weeks and 57 books, but he had finally found it. From what he had read, elementals were a race of powerful natural wizards and witches that were so in tune with nature that they were born with the ability to control one of the 4 elements: wind, fire, water and earth. He didn't know what happened to them all, but whatever it was they almost all died out around 2000 years ago. From what he had learned, what had happened to Terra was not uncommon among earth elementals. It was some kind of last resort defense that they had that would activate automatically when their life was in danger. Back in the times when elemental had been more common, this wouldn't have been a problem because it was common knowledge how to release them. For Terra, however, there had been no one that knew how. Another thing he had read was that, while in that state, the elemental was completely self-aware. Meaning that she was literally trapped in her own skin, which might explain why he had heard her screaming. Because of his training with Jiraiya and the Toads, Naruto was highly tuned to nature in a similar way to how the elementals of old had been. Not exactly the same, but enough for him to connect with her on a subconscious level. Ever since he had heard it, Naruto hadn't been able to get the scream out of his head. No matter how hard he tried, it was constantly there. Not even his sins had been able to quiet it for him, and it had made it all the harder to concentrate on finding a way to help her. The moment he had finished, the blonde left the room, re-engaging the security system. Using a seal he had planted near Titan Tower in a blind spot of the cameras the day Raven had taken him there, he disappeared in a bright flash. Appearing next to Titan Tower in a flash of yellow light, Naruto walked straight to the door and banged on it loudly. In the back of his mind, he took note of the fact that it was dark out, but all things considered he really didn't care. After a few minutes of waiting, he heard a small beeping noise and looked to his right to see an image of a half-asleep Robin on a video screen next to the door. "Naruto? Is that you? How the hell did you get here at 4 in the morning? Where have you been? Raven's been worried sick about you." Taking in the blonde's agitated movement as he shifted from foot to foot constantly. Robin took a moment to look at him. His clothes were all ruffled and looked to have multiple sweat stains on them. What he could see of the blonde's hair was dirty and tangled into knots, the bags under his eyes gave him a haunted look, and his skin was so pale, the bird named Hero was worried he might be about to collapse on their doorstep. "I need to talk to all of you. Can you let me in and gather the others? What's this about? I'll tell you when you're all in one place." After seeming to think about it for a moment, Robin nodded his head. "Okay, I'll get the others and then come get you. Wait there." About 15 minutes later, the door opened to show Robin standing in full gear with a small frown on his face. "What happened to you?" Naruto shook his head and motioned for him to lead the way. The boy wonder gave the blonde a worried look before turning around and leading him back through the tower to the common room. When they entered, Naruto saw all the Titans in different states of awareness, with Cyborg being the most alert, followed by Raven, Starfire and lastly Beast Boy, who was stood in the middle of the room, eyes closed and a large snot bubble coming out of his nose. The second they saw Naruto, all three gasped, with Raven quickly making her way over to the blonde and Cyborg hitting his green friend in the back of the head to wake him up. When she reached him, the gray-skinned teen pulled him into a hug, slightly shocking the others, before yelling at him. "Where the hell have you been? I was worried sick about you. I went to the store and it was closed. I waited in the tea shop, but you never came. Now you show up here in the middle of the night, looking like you've been in a hole for the last 2 weeks. What the hell is going on?" Taking a moment for his sleep-deprived brain to understand everything she said, Naruto let a small tired smile form on his lips and mentally laughed at just how close she was, saying things about him being in a hole. "It's good to see you too, Raven-chan." Letting out a frustrated growl, she punched the blonde lightly in the arm. She let out a shout of surprise when he fell over, lying on the floor limply. "Naruto?" Rushing over to look at the boy, the Titans leaned over him and saw he was staring at the roof with tired eyes. The small smile was still on his face as he chuckled lightly. "I'm fine, just tired. Could one of you help me to the couch? I don't think I can move." Bending down and lifting the limp Naruto over his shoulder, Cyborg carried him over to the couch and set him down in the seat facing them all. "Thank you very much. Might I just add that your shoulder is extremely hard and painful." Sharing a worried look between each other, the Titans turned to the obviously delirious boy and took a step back so that Robin could look him in the face. "Naruto, what are you doing here? How did you even get to the island?" At his question, the blonde shook his head and adapted a serious expression that surprised the 5 teens watching because of how he had been moments before. Looking Robin in the eye, Naruto let out a sigh and ran a hand over his face. "I need you all to understand. There are some things I can't explain to you right now, and I have good reasons why. I need you all to trust me." After sharing yet another look between themselves, the group of teens reluctantly nodded their heads. Smiling at them, Naruto reached into the bag he had slung over his shoulder that the others had only just realized he had and pulled out a piece of paper. He held it out towards Raven. Taking the paper straight away, she quickly read what was on the paper and gasped, turning shocked eyes to the boy in front of her. "Where did you find this?" "I already told you. There are things I can't explain. Just know what's written on that paper is the reason I've been off the grid for the last 2 weeks." Turning to look at her, Robin let a small frown cross his face. "What's on the paper?" Without answering, Raven wrapped the group in her aura, including Naruto. Before they knew what was going on, they found themselves outside a very familiar cave. Without stopping to explain why she brought them here, Raven walked off in the direction of Terra, leaving the others to follow. Luckily, Naruto seemed to have caught his second wind and didn't need to be carried anymore. As they got closer, Naruto started to hear the screaming again. Only this time louder and clearer than before. He kept grabbing onto the side of his head with a small grimace of pain on his face that didn't go unnoticed by the others. The moment they arrived at the statue, Raven sat down on the ground with her legs crossed and started to mutter under her breath too quietly for the others to hear. When Robin turned to ask Naruto what was going on, he was met with a blonde, giving him a hard glare and a finger brought up to his lips in a hushing motion. Nodding his head, they all turned back to Raven just in time to see her surrounded by her aura. A moment later it moved to spread over the Terra statue, connecting them. When the statue was completely engulfed by the dark aura, Raven started to speak louder and faster, in a language none of them except Naruto could understand. Suddenly, without warning, she opened her eyes to show that they were glowing white like fire. Not a second later, the cave was filled with smoke. As the smoke appeared, they had heard a scream coming from the direction of the statue before it faded into silence. They held their breath and waited for the smoke to clear so they could see what had happened. As it got thinner, two human-shaped shadows could be seen coming into view, one being supported by the other and the sound of coughing reaching their ears. Without thinking, Beast Boy ran forward before the smoke was completely gone and let out a gasp at what he saw. Right before his eyes, with an arm slung over Raven's shoulder for support, was Terra, her light blue eyes drooping slightly in exhaustion as she sent him a small smile. "Beast Boy." At that moment, she fainted, going limp in Raven's arms. Just as the green team got to the two girls and picked the blonde girl up into his arms and held her close to his chest, tears in his eyes, the other titans and Naruto arrived. The other three teens' eyes widened in shock and the blonde sent a tired smile to Raven. Closing his eyes for a moment to revel in the silence that settled around the cave, now that the screaming had stopped, the blonde teen started to slowly back away from the group as they gathered around the unconscious Terra. By the time the titans calmed down enough to take in what was going on around them, Naruto had disappeared without a trace. Because of them needing to get Terra back to the tower, Robin decided that they would need to wait until later to find him, though he wasn't sure if he was going to thank him or interrogate the blonde yet. He would decide when they were next face to face. The moment they were back at the tower, they all rushed to sickbay and Beast Boy gently lay the girl in his arms on a bed. They all stood back as Cyborg ran multiple tests with several different machines. After an hour of scans, he put an IV drip in her arm because she was dehydrated and waited for her to wake up. As they were waiting, Robin turned his attention to Raven with a question. What was on that paper? Taking her eyes off the blonde laying on the bed in front of her, the blue-haired girl turned them to her leader with an unreadable expression on her face. A very old spell that I had all but given up hope of ever finding. I've been looking for it ever since this happened to Terra. I don't know how he found it. Deciding to join in on the conversation, Cyborg decided to add in his idea. He collects rare books, right? Maybe he found it in one of them. Shaking her head, Raven looked back to Terra without really seeing her, lost in her thoughts. I've read all his books, remember? There was nothing in any of them. This kind of information is beyond anything even he has in his collection. Maybe you haven't seen all his collection. What if he had others that are more valuable, kept in a safe place? Remember that guy with the thug when we first met him? If he wasn't the first, maybe Naruto decided to hide the others. Before they could discuss it further, a moan was heard from the bed and they all turned to see Terra shifting weakly. Slowly, she opened her eyes, looking around the room in confusion. Her eyes stayed slightly glazed over for a minute, not really seeing what was going on. Beast Boy squeezed her hand. Almost instantly, her eyes cleared up and locked on the green teen. She just stared at him for a moment, tears slowly building in her eyes. Without warning, Terra threw herself at the green teen and pulled him into a hug, crying on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of it to happen, I was just so desperate." Gently patting her on the back, tears starting to build in his own eyes, Beast Boy held her close for a few minutes as Terra continued to cry into his shoulder, apologizing over and over again. It wasn't until 10 minutes later, when she had calmed down enough to stop crying, that the blonde realized that they weren't the only two in the room. Looking down so that she didn't meet any of their eyes, Terra let a small sheepish smile cross her lips as she rubbed her hands together nervously. Hey guys." All the titans, except Raven, rushed the poor girl and pulled her into a group hug, laughing at the shocked look on her face. At the side of the bed, Raven let a small smile cross her face at the sight of her friends, including Terra, being so happy. For the next 3 days, they all stayed at Terra's bedside almost constantly while she recuperated, talking and filling her in on what had happened while she was gone. Luckily, nothing bad happened in the city during those 3 days to call them away, which meant they didn't have to leave her alone in the tower. On the third day, Terra was able to get out of the bed, though she did need Beast Boy to help her walk seeing, and they moved to the common room. They sat around the girl as she told them what it was like being turned into stone. It was terrible. I couldn't see or hear anything. Even though I could feel my body, no matter how hard I tried I couldn't move an inch. It was like I was floating in some kind of abyss and, after a while, I started to lose track of time. Minutes blended into hours and hours into days. That was when I started screaming. As she talked, they all saw how her eyes took on a haunted look to them and her body began to shake slightly at the memory. Because he was sitting next to her, Beast Boy put a hand on her shoulder in an effort to comfort her, getting a grateful smile for his efforts. Letting out a slightly shaky sigh, Terra continued. I don't know how long I was screaming and I know no one could hear me. I didn't need to sleep and because it was in my head, I didn't need to stop, so I just kept screaming. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, I saw a light. Well, not saw exactly. More like I felt it. I don't know what it was or where it was coming from, but I knew it was far away. Then it just disappeared. I didn't see it again until just before you guy brought me back. It was so close, bright and warm like the sun. I could feel it wrapping around me like a safety blanket. The next thing I knew, I could move again and you guys were there. I felt the light linger for a moment, then it disappeared like the first time. They all shared a confused look for a moment, trying to think of what she could have been talking about, not understanding what the light she was talking about could have been. They were all slightly shocked when Beast Boy spoke. You don't think I mean, he was the only other person with us at the time, and he started acting really strange when we showed him the video link. Looking at each of them in turn with a questioning look on her face, Terra looked back to the green shapeshifter sitting next to her and tilted her head slightly to the side. Who are you talking about? Deciding to answer her question, Robin leaned forward in his seat with a contemplative look on his masked face. Naruto, Raven's boyfriend. He is not my boyfriend. Was with us when we changed you back. It was actually him that gave us the spell Raven used to free you. He came to the tower a few weeks before and, after he asked about you when he saw the photo on the table, we showed him a live video link we set up in the cave so we could keep an eye on you. After that he started acting weird and left. None of us saw him for 2 weeks. Then, out of nowhere, he showed up at the door in the middle of the night, looking like he hadn't slept in days, told us not to ask any questions, and gave Raven a sheet of paper with the spell on it. We came straight to the cave. He was with us but, just as we were leaving, we noticed he was nowhere to be seen. Shrugging her shoulders slightly, Terra just smiled to herself for a moment before looking up at the group again. I guess I owe him my thanks. Her eyes on the floor, Raven thought for a moment before looking back up to the blonde girl, startling Terra slightly at the intense look being directed at her. What did it feel like? The light, I mean. You said it was like the sun, but what else? Closing her eye in thought, Terra frowned slightly at the memory. I don't know how to explain it. Like I said, it was comforting, but that was what was being directed at me, like it was trying to make me feel better. It was so powerful, like nature itself was concentrated into one spot. I could feel it spreading warmth throughout my body. But when I felt it in the cave, when it was so close. Trailing off, the teen started to panic when the Earth user started to cry. It was so lonely, so sad. I think it was comforting me without realizing it because he couldn't stand the idea of something else feeling anywhere close to how it felt. It held so much pain I don't understand how could something so sad and in so much pain feel so good to be around. When you freed me, I wasn't screaming because of being trapped. I was screaming for the light, for its pain. Pulling the girl into another hug as she cried into his shoulder yet again, Beast Boy looked to his friends with an even more confused look than before Terra's description. That don't sound anything like Naruto. He always acts so happy whenever we see him. Frowning, Robin let out a sigh of frustration, running a hand over his face and shaking his head slightly. He didn't say anything for a few minutes, lost in his thoughts, as the others waited to hear what he thought. Nodding his head to himself, the boy wonder stood up from his seat and looked to Raven and held out his hand. The only one that can make any sense of any of this is Naruto. It's Monday, so he wouldn't open the store. Do you have his number? Hesitating for a moment, Raven nodded her head and passed her mobile to her brightly dressed friend after bringing up the blonde's number. Naruto was sitting at his usual table in the tea shop with a book in his hand and a cup of his favorite green tea on the table in front of him. After he had seen the girl was fine and the Titans were taking care of her, the blonde had discreetly left the cave before flashing back to his home and falling to sleep in his bed. He may be able to function without much sleep, but it still took a lot out of him. The next day, he woke up at his normal time, did his morning workout, got dressed and continued his day like he would any other. To be honest, he had thought the Titans would be at his shop with 100 questions. Robin, he knew, would definitely be coming sooner or later with Raven only a few steps behind. But they never came. After 3 days had passed, there had been no sign of them, including Raven. He assumed they were with the girl, Terra, if he remembered her name correctly, and were waiting to make sure she wouldn't suffer any side effects. That was fine by him. The longer they waited, the longer he had before he would have to answer their questions, not that he would anyway if he didn't want to. He had just finished his tea when he felt his pocket vibrating. He pulled out his phone, taking a look at the caller ID. Naruto let out a resigned sigh before answering. Naruto here. It's Robin. I need you to come to Titan Tower. He wasn't surprised that it wasn't Raven, even if it was her phone used to call him. I'll be there in 10. Don't get your tights in a bunch, traffic light san. My name's not TR. Before he could finish, Naruto hung up his phone and made his way down the street, back to his shop to pick up his get-well present for the girl. Exactly 10 minutes later, Naruto knocked on the door and stood waiting for someone to come and let him in. Within 5 minutes, the door was opened by a serious-faced Robin. After a nod to each other, they made their way to the common room in silence. When they entered the room, the blonde ex-ninja was met with happy faces, which threw him a little. His eyes were drawn to the blonde girl sitting on the couch, who he could see was staring at him with her mouth slightly open and her eyes wide. He had to admit, she was pretty in a little sister kind of way, and her eyes seemed so innocent she reminded him of a baby rabbit. The thing that worried him was that, despite the baggy hospital gown she was wearing, he could easily see she was severely malnourished and her skin was a little too pale to be considered healthy. He could hear gluttony in the back of his mind, telling him to give her something to eat before she collapsed, but did his best to ignore it. Turning his attention to Raven as she made her way over to stand next to him, the blonde gave her a charming smile and tipped his hat to her. It was while he did this that the gray-skinned girl punched him in the stomach. Letting out an oof noise, Naruto quickly recovered and sent a pouting look towards the girl, who just raised her eyebrow at him before turning away and walking away to sit on the armchair. "What did I do this time, Raven-chan? You ran off the night we went to free Terra. I just thought I'd give you all your space. After all, she's your friend." Seeing that she was refusing to meet his eye, Naruto let out a sigh before turning to the blonde girl that was still staring at him. "It's nice to meet you, Terra-san. I hope you aren't having too many problems with readjusting." For a moment, the only response he got was the girl blinking at him with her large doe-like eyes before she seemed to pull herself together. "Wow, yeah, I'm great. So, you're the Naruto I've been hearing so much about. Whatever you heard was a malicious lie spread by a group of breakdancing bunnies that were pissed I won all their carrots in a poker game." At his words, everyone in the room blinked at him for a moment, not sure if he was being serious or not, before the silence was broken by Beast Boy falling off his chair in laughter. Cyborg looked close to joining him, but just managed to keep his balance. "Haha, dude, that was great, hahaha." Grinning at the green teen, Naruto sent a nod in his direction before turning back to Terra, who had started staring at him again. Before he could ask why, she spoke, almost shouting as she did. "What happened to you? What are you?" At her question, the room went completely quiet. Even Beast Boy had stopped laughing and looked towards him with a serious face that looked ridiculous from his position on the floor. Losing the grin from his face, Naruto bent his head down slightly so the top of his face was shadowed, but they could still see his eyes, which stayed locked on his fellow blonde that, despite obviously being a little shy, was staring back at him with an unflinching gaze. "I'm not sure I know what you mean." Still not looking away, though she did shiver a bit at his flat tone when he spoke, Terra steeled her resolve. "You're the one that I felt, the light I saw when I was trapped. I can still feel you, you know. Why are you so sad?" It was several minutes before Naruto answered and, in that time, all he did was stare at the girl with a blank expression. "Some things are better left in the past. As for what I am, that's easy. I'm just a simple store owner who happens to collect rare books in his spare time. Nothing more, nothing less. You would do well to remember that, Terra-san. All of you would." The air in the room started to get thicker and thicker as Naruto spoke, leaving all a little short of breath. Then, as if a switch had been flicked, everything was back to normal. A small smile was back on the blonde's face as he reached over his shoulder and pulled a book out of his bag. "I almost forgot. I made this for you as a get-well present. I hope you like it." Taking the book offered to her by her fellow blonde, Terra looked confused at the sudden change of emotions. Looking at the book in her hands, knowing that the others were all leaning over her shoulder to see it too, Terra ran her fingers over the soft earthy brown leather it was bound in. It was a decent-sized book, about 4 inches thick and 30 inches long. It didn't have a title on the cover, but when she opened it, they could see that it was made with high-quality paper, and the words were in red. But it was what she read on the first page that left them all speechless. In big bold writing on the first page were the words Earth Elementals, with an odd symbol under it that looked like one big circle with a second smaller circle inside it and a vertical line running through the middle of both circles. Underneath that was Naruto's name, declaring him as the author. She started flipping through the pages, stopping on random pages for a moment before moving on to another. They all had the same red writing, and on a few of the pages were what looked like charcoal sketches of people in different poses, surrounded by floating pieces of earth. All of the book looked like it had all been drawn and written by a professional. Looking up at the whiskered teen that was grinning at her with teary eyes, it took Terra a moment to remember how to talk. Even then, all she could do was say one word. "How?" "Like I said, I'm a collector. You'd be surprised what you can find in books, especially old ones. I simply took what I found and put it into one book. If you turn to the next page, there's an index." Quickly doing as she was told, Terra turned to the page with a shaky hand. Her eyes widened to the size of dinner plates as she looked at the names of the chapters. Chapter 1 What is an Elemental? Chapter 2 What is an Earth Elemental? Chapter 3 History of Earth Elementals. Chapter 4 Understanding the Earth Element. Chapter 5 How to channel your energy. Chapter 6 How your emotional state can affect your control. Chapter 7 What are the strengths and weaknesses of the Earth Element? Chapter 8 Introduction into Earth Manipulation. Chapter 9 Level 1 Earth Manipulation. Chapter 10 Level 2 Earth Manipulation. Chapter 11 Level 3 Earth Manipulation. Chapter 12 Advanced Earth Manipulation. Chapter 13 How to Fight with the Earth Element. Chapter 14 How to Defend with the Earth Element. Chapter 15 Creative Uses for the Earth Element. Chapter 16 Other Useful Facts that you will need to know. With tears now falling freely down her face, Terra sent Naruto a large shaky smile as she hugged the book to her chest. Walking over and placing a hand on her shoulder, he gave it a gentle squeeze. I only wish I could have given it to you sooner. Thank you. After that, Starfire and Beast Boy took Terra back to the bed she had been using in the sickbay, still hugging the book to her chest. When they left the room, the atmosphere seemed to shift drastically. Motioning for Naruto to take a seat, Robin leaned forward and laced his fingers together in front of him as he stared at the blonde. Cyborg and Raven stood on either side of him. Naruto took note of the fact that both looked uncomfortable, even though they were trying to hide it, and that brought a small smirk to his lips. Locking eyes with the masked boy sitting across from him, the whiskered teen nodded his head for him to begin, knowing exactly what this was about. Where did you get all that information? The spell to help Terra, the book, all of it. Raven's been looking for this stuff for months and couldn't find anything. You did it in 2 weeks. Giving the three another one of his charming smiles, Naruto leaned back in his seat, completely at ease. Maybe she just wasn't looking in the right places. Frowning at the answer, Robin let out a small growl of frustration. This isn't a game. Then stop acting like it is and think. You're a smart guy, Robin-san. Use that brain of your and think. Just like the last time it happened, the three were left completely stunned by the way the blonde's mood seemed to change in an instant. Not giving them a chance to talk, Naruto pressed on. As I'm sure you know, knowledge is power, and books are nothing more than knowledge written down on paper, for all to see. But what if, in some cases, a book can literally hold power? Imagine being able to reshape the very world around you with nothing more than a few words, written down in a book. I've spent the last 3 years of my life collecting those very books. And hiding them away from the world. Then why did you give the spell to Raven? It's not exactly a secret what happened in that cave with Terra. You could have found it without too much trouble. So, why come to us? Shaking his head at the question, Naruto just laughed. Do you know what makes me the best person to have all those books? All that power. Power corrupts. It's a fact of life. So what would make someone the perfect candidate? To have all that power, yet not be corrupted by it. Adding a confused expression on his face from the odd question, Robin's thoughts were interrupted by Raven. You can't use magic. Smiling at the girl, Naruto nodded his head. Exactly. I'm the perfect candidate because I can't use any of that knowledge. I can be corrupted by power that is unavailable to me. Then why risk giving us that spell or Terra that book? There was nothing in it for you and you risked a lot by giving it to us. My reasons for helping that girl are my own. As for the book, she had a right to that knowledge. She should have been given it at an early age and because she didn't, Terra had to go through a lot of hardships. Giving her that book is my way of helping her. Stepping forward, Cyborg asked something that had been bothering him. If these books are as dangerous as you say, why not destroy them? I can't. Seeing the confused looks on their faces, the blonde smiled. Books as old and powerful as the ones I'm talking about are different from normal books. They've existed for so long and hold so much power that they need to exist. If I were to destroy any of them, they would simply reform somewhere else in the world, as good as new. Then, there are some that have developed self-awareness. They can get into your head and force you to use them. In the end, it's better to just keep them locked away, far from the rest of the world, where they can't be found. Staring at the blonde sitting across from him for a long moment, Robin had one last question for him. Just who are you? The only response he got was an almost predatory grin spreading across the Naruto's whiskered face, showing his fang-like canines. Chapter 4 Unexpected. It was another week before Terra was back to full strength, though she was still a little weak and she had to be put on a special diet that Naruto had given then to help her gain weight. He had just written it down on a piece of paper the day he had given her the book before leaving. The fact that he seemed to have memorized a diet for severely underweight teens had sent several alarms off in Robin's head, but he couldn't for the life of him figure out way. Ever since the blonde had given her the book, Terra had been reading almost non-stop, sleeping with it held to her chest and never letting it out of her sight, as if she were afraid it would disappear. They could all understand why. For Terra, that book was a way for her to control her powers and even learn why she had them in the first place. She had spent years wandering around deserts trying to figure out how to control her abilities, staying as far away from civilization as possible in fear of hurting people, but with a book that would all change. The information Naruto had found not only explained how to control it, but also the best ways to use it. Unfortunately, she hadn't started training yet, Naruto having told her to wait until her body was healthy enough to handle the strain, or she might end up back in a hospital bed. But not even having to wait could not put a damper on Terra's spirit, and she had agreed without much complaint. Ever since Robin had called him the week before, Naruto had made a habit of stopping by whenever he had time to spare, as long as the Titans weren't off fighting crime. He would spend a few hours talking to Raven, normally in the privacy of her room, before hanging out in the common room with the rest of them. It had been driving both Robin and Cyborg mad, trying to figure out how he was able to get to the island that Titan Tower had been built on without ever being picked up by their security systems. At first it had been a bit of a blow to the mechanical teen's pride that the blonde seemed to be able to get past anything he set up, but after a while, he started to think of it as a challenge instead. Unfortunately, all it did to Robin was prove he was hiding more than he had told them and to the masked teen that was dangerous. Naruto was an unknown element. Something unplanned and unprepared for that he had next to no knowledge about. To him something like that was scary, it scared him that there was an unknown hanging around him and his friends. As he sat at his desk, the glow from his computer screen being the only source of light in the otherwise dark room, Robin frowned at what he was seeing. Despite his promise to Raven that he wouldn't, the boy wonder had done a background check on Naruto, and the information he had found made him more worried. It was all there: birth certificate, school records, past living address, all the information that you would expect to see. But he had spent years with Bruce, learning to tell fakes from the real thing, and even though they were good he could tell they were all fakes. Whoever he had gotten them from was a professional and knew what they were doing, but they had made several mistakes, a few holes in the history that should have been covered, a misspelled word here or there that wouldn't have been present in an official document, all little things that added up into one big thing. The problem was that even though he knew something wasn't right with the blonde, there was nothing he could do about it. First was the fact he had helped Terra, something none of them had been able to do. Second was his relationship with Raven, even if they both denied they were dating, the masked teen could see what was going on and knew it was only a matter of time before they were. And third was the fact he wasn't sure he wanted to. Despite his best efforts to keep his distance from him, Robin had found himself drawn to Naruto like the others were. There was just something about him that made you want to trust him, made you want to be his friend. It wasn't something that could be explained, but it was there. He knew there was more to the blonde than he let on, him admitting that he was collecting dangerous books to keep them out of the wrong hands was only the tip of the iceberg. In the end he decided to put all the information he had found on Naruto, including his suspicions on the fake documents, and sent them to Bruce in an email asking him to do him a favor. He was too close to the situation, and a fresh, unbiased set of eyes could be just the thing that was needed. Letting out a tired sigh, Robin turned his computer off and moved to lay on his bed, still in his costume and staying above the covers. He would worry about what to do about Naruto later. Naruto was walking through the bookshelves of his store with a content look on his face, his arms full of books as he took his time placing them in the appropriate section. He loved doing this, just spending time in his store, doing normal things without having to worry about someone trying to stab him in the back at any minute. He would never have been able to do something like this back in Konoha, that's for sure. Even if it wasn't burned to the ground the day it opened, no one would buy anything from the demon. Just one more thing that proved he had made the right choice when he left. It was a slow day, only a handful of people coming into the store to browse through the books on the shelves, and none of them were there to look at his private collection, so he had enough time to restock the shelves while it wasn't busy. He was a little surprised to see Cyborg walking through the door. From what Naruto could tell, the mechanical teen was alone, none of the other titans being with him, and the moment he saw the blonde, a large grin spread across his face, and he made his way straight over to him. "Just the guy I was looking for." Raising an eyebrow at the larger teen, Naruto gave him a small smile. "I doubt it was hard to find me, you know the only days I take off are Wednesdays and Mondays, and today is Saturday." Grin still in place, Cyborg let out a sheepish chuckle and rubbed the back of his head with his hand. Letting out a small chuckle and turning to the shelf in front of him, the blonde teen went back stocking the shelves. For a few minutes neither of them said anything, Naruto just walking around with his arms full of books and stopping at seemingly random places to put a book on a shelf. Cyborg just followed him, obviously wanting to say something, but not sure of how to start until he let out a sigh and just said it. "Are you doing anything Friday night at 9? Stopping mid-step, the books in his hands almost dropping to the floor from his surprise, Naruto turned to his fellow teen with wide eyes. "Not that I'm not flattered, but I don't bend that way." "What, no? That's not what I meant. It's Robin's birthday on Friday and we're throwing him a surprise party at Pizza Corner. I was asking you to come for Raven." "Oh. That makes a little more sense. But if it's Traffic Light Sen's birthday, why are you asking me to come for Raven-chan?" As they were talking, Naruto made his way to the counter to deal with a customer. "She isn't exactly the most social of people, you know. We just thought that if you were there maybe she would have more fun." After taking a moment to think about what Cyborg had said, the blonde nodded his head and smiled. "Okay, I see where you're coming from, I'll be there." After that Cyborg left, saying something about needing to get back to help the others plan. Shaking his head, Naruto went back to restocking the shelves, or he would have if not for the person he saw wailing through the door out of the corner of his eye, and this time he did drop the books in his arms, letting out a small gasp. The boy that was standing in the open doorway had short red hair, pale skin that was so white it looked unhealthy, and stood with his back straight and his arms crossed over his chest. He was wearing a thick brown leather coat that ended just above his knees, dark blue jeans that looked a little too worn, and had the bottoms tucked into a pair of bulky brown boots. He had on a pair of brown leather fingerless and a burgundy scarf wrapped around his neck and a pair of black tinted goggles on his forehead. He was drawing a lot of attention because of his warm clothes when it was over 30 degrees outside, yet he didn't even look like he was sweating. But the two things that stood out the most were the dark rings around his eyes and the scar on the left side of his forehead in the shape of the kanji for love. Gaara. His red-haired friend just stared at him with a blank expression, though he could see the way the corner of his lips twitched slightly. After he got over his initial, Naruto quickly made his way around the store, apologizing to the few people that were still looking around and saying that he had to close early for the day. When it was only the two of them, Naruto locked the door and without a word, led Gaara to his fake home behind the store. When they walked into the living room, Gaara moved straight to the couch and sat down, watching as Naruto started to pace the room in front of him with a serious look on his face. "You shouldn't be here, how is it possible that you're here?" Raising a non-existent eyebrow, the red-headed Sandnin locked eyes with his friend. "I was hoping you would be able to tell me that. 3 years ago I was sent to deliver a scroll to Konoha. While I was walking through the forest I sensed a group of chakra signatures and decided to investigate, and when I arrived at the point they had stopped, I had just enough time to see you and a group of other leaf nin before I blacked out. I woke up in a desert not far away from the city, and I've spent the last 3 years trying to find you. Now that I found you, I'm not surprised it took me so long. A bookstore is the last place I would have expected." Taking a moment to digest what he was told and choosing to ignore the comment at the end, Naruto let out a breath and sat next to Gaara, slouching down and running a hand over his face, and told his friend what had led to him being chased by Leaf Nin, though he did leave out certain details like his voices. "I'm so sorry, Gaara, it was only supposed to take me to the Toad Mountain, but I made a mistake. I can't even send you back even if I did know how, summons don't work here for some reason." They sat in silence for several minutes, Naruto not looking at the redhead and Gaara just staring at the blonde with his usual blank expression. After a while, Gaara placed his hand on Naruto's shoulder and let a small smile cross his lips. "I don't blame you, if anything I should be thanking you. The only people in the elemental nations that would miss me are Temari and Kankuro. Without me dragging them down they will be much happier. My village would never have accepted me after all the blood stained on my hands, and this new world is like a second chance for both of us." Giving his friend a sad smile, Naruto nodded his head before getting a curious look on his face. "If you've been looking for me for the last 3 years, how have you survived? From your clothes I assume you at least know the lang." Looking down at himself for a moment, Gaara let another small smile spread across his face. "Indeed, I learned from several books and after that found someone that could make the necessary documents that needed in this world. I stole these clothes and have been living in the desert. I was only able to find you because I saw you with that group walking into a cave and I followed you here. I was waiting to make sure it was you before I approached." Nodding his head again, at least that explained why Gaara was wearing all the thick clothes. It could get quite cold in the desert at night. He could also tell that the redhead didn't spend as much time around people as he himself did from the thick accent he had when speaking English. "Well, we can't have that, you can stay with me from now on, it's better than living in the desert and I could use the company." Standing up and looking around the room, Gaara looked back at Naruto. "It's a little small for two." Patting the redhead on the back with a large smile on his face, Naruto led him out of the room and to the wall at the end of the hallway. When Thursday came around, Raven and the other titans were getting worried. The last time any of them had seen Naruto was when Cyborg had invited him to Robin's birthday party. They had all gotten used to his presence, and the fact he hadn't been seen for a few days was getting to them all, especially considering what had happened the last time he had gone off the radar. It was for this reason that found Raven, Starfire, Beast Boy and Terra walking into the blonde teen store, expecting to find him walking around with his arms full of books and a smile on his face. What they weren't expecting was for a strange redhead in a thick leather coat that didn't look right on someone for this time of year. He had his back turned to them at first, but turned to look the moment he bell above the door was heard, showing them his dark ringed eyes and scar on his forehead and the books in his arms. He didn't have any expression on his face as he stared at them, just stood waiting for them to talk. Stepping forward with a confused look on her face, Raven took a moment to look at him more carefully, particularly the scar. Sorry, but is Naruto in?" He just kept staring at them for a moment, his eyes shifting from one to the next with cold calculating eyes, and they were a little surprised when he didn't even bat an eye at Beast Boy. When he was done sizing them up, the red-headed nodded and gestured with his head for them to follow him to the balcony without actually saying anything. He led them to the back of the balcony to the table Raven would normally sit at when reading one of Naruto's books, to find said blonde sat with his nose in a book that looked just as old as the others in his collection. He was wearing a pair of rubber gloves, and set in the table next to him were several bottles of foul-smelling chemicals, paintbrushes, and what looked like a sewing kit. He had his back turned to them as they approached, but as soon as they were in earshot, he turned to look at them and smiled, nodded to the red-headed teen, leading them, and turned back to the book. "Good to see you, guy. I see you've met Gaara." Casting a look towards the strange boy out of the corner of her eye, Raven moved to stand right behind the blonde with the others not a step behind her. "We came to check on you. The last time you disappeared for a few days, you turned up at the tower in the middle of the night, looking like you had been in a hole for 2 weeks and dug your way out." Nodding his head absent-mindedly without stopping in his work, Naruto looked at the gray-skinned girl out of the corner of his eye. "Sorry to worry you, I've been a little busy what with Gaara and this book. I haven't had time to visit." Looking to the now identified Gaara with a confused expression on his green face, Beast Boy walked over to stand next to the boy and smiled. "It's nice to meet you, Gaara. That's a strange name. It means a demon that only loves himself. It was the name my mother gave me moments before she died." They all looked at the boy with shocked expressions on their faces at the way he just said that without showing any emotion at all, like it was an automatic response that he was so used to giving, he didn't even care who he told anymore. Putting down the brush in high hand and letting out a sigh, Naruto turned to look at Gaara with an exasperated look. "Gaara, we've been over this, you don't need to tell people something just because they ask." After thinking for a moment, the red-headed teen nodded his head and turned back to the others. "I apologize if I have made you uncomfortable." After he said that, the red-headed teen turned and walked back down the stairs without even waiting for an answer, causing Naruto to let out another sigh. "Sorry about him, he doesn't mean to be rude. Gaara's not had the happiest of lives and doesn't spend much time around people." Nodding their heads in understanding, Beast Boy moved to stand next to Naruto, with a slightly confused look on his face, as he looked back in the direction that Gaara had gone. "Just who is that guy anyway, dude? For some reason I get the feeling I should run whenever he so much as looks at me." "Gaara's an old friend, turns out he's lived in the area for just as long as I have, but we never ran into each other until the other day. I invited him to stay with me, and I'm paying him to help out in the store." Floating over so that she was hovering in the air just on the other side of the balcony, Starfire looked down at the red-headed teen with large innocent eyes as he went from one shelf to the next, just like Naruto always would, Beast Boy and Terra joining the alien princess in her observation. Shaking her head at the three, Raven turned back to Naruto, who had returned his attention to the book in front of him while she hadn't been looking, and took the empty seat next to him. "So how much did you pay for this one?" Without looking up from his work, the blonde teen smiled. "I didn't, I'm repairing it for a contact of mine. I scratched their back and all that crap. They asked me to see what I could do. When I'm finished it should be somewhere in the price range of 13 to 15,000. I didn't know you repaired books as well as collect them." "What, you think I'd tell you everything about me straight away? If I did that, how could I keep a cute girl like yourself interested? A little mystery does wonders for a relationship." It took several minutes for the gray-skinned teen to recover from her blush, and when she did, her eyes fell on the book. The pages really did look worn, with the ink fading and several rips in random places. She just sat and watched as Naruto worked, using the different equipment set on the table with practiced ease. It was while she watched him that Raven heard the front door being banged open, followed by loud footsteps and a familiar voice shouting to be led to the blonde idiot. Moments later, Gaara led a red-faced Mr. Gold, along with 5 thugs, up the stairs, his face as expressionless as even though one of the men was holding a gun to the back of his head. The moment they saw Raven and her friends, the other men pulled out their own guns and aimed them at each of them, while Mr. Gold walked to Naruto, who had barely spared the man and his thugs a glance, pulled out his own gun, and slammed it into the back of the blonde's head. "At my fucking books now, if you don't I'll have my men kill all the people here. I've had enough games." Looking at each of the thugs one after the other, Raven found her eyes locked with her green-skinned friend, and after casting one last look around, shook her head just enough for him to see. With this many guns pointed at different people, she would need to speak in order to cast the spell she needed, and if she tried they would probably shoot before she could finish, or one of the guns would go off by accident. Standing slowly while rubbing the back of his head where the now smirking man had hit him with his gun, Naruto took a moment to look at all the people in the room before his eye landed on Gaara. "You mind?" "Not at all." Everyone looked at the two boys for a moment with confusion clear on their faces, but before anyone could ask what they were talking about, the red-headed teen in the thick leather coat uncrossed his arms and let them hang loosely at his side. For a moment nothing happened except the thug holding Gaara at gunpoint shifting his stance and held it with both hands. Then without warning sand exploded out of his sleeves and the bottom of his coat, spreading out across the whole room and left them all blind for a moment until it settled. When they could all see again, Raven, Beast Boy, Starfire and Terra were left speechless. Floating in the air above their head upside down were the 5 thugs and Mr. Gold trapped in cocoons of sand, their faces slowly turning red from the blood rushing to their heads. They all had sand covering their mouths so that they couldn't make a sound, but they could all see from the wide bloodshot eyes that they were screaming inside. Walking over to stand next to the red-headed teen, Naruto patted him on the shoulder with a smile before nodding his head towards the door, and without a word, Gaara slowly made his way to the front door and used his sand to throw the 6 men out onto the street before making his way back to the still stunned group. Terra was the first to break out of her shock and quickly ran up to Gaara, who had just finished collecting his sand back into his coat with a wide grin and stars in her eyes. "You're an earth elemental too? This is so great. We have so much to talk about. How did you control the sand? I can't do that. Is it like a more advanced control thing?" All she got in reply was a blank stare. Chuckling to himself, Naruto walked up behind his fellow blonde and rested his hands on her shoulders. "Sorry to disappoint you, Terra-san, but Gaara isn't an elemental. His ability is control over sand, not the earth." Seeing the sad look on her face, Naruto had a mischievous smirk cross his lips. "Though to be honest, your abilities are similar, maybe he could help you with your training. What do you think, Gaara? Want to help a cute girl with her powers? Share your wisdom." The look of absolute hope that was now on Terra's face as she looked at the sand user was enough to make even Gaara crack, who knew that the puppy eye jutsu could be used by girls in both worlds on pure instinct alone. Sending his blonde friend a small frown, Gaara thought for a moment before nodding his head. "Inform me when you are ready and I will see what I can do." Without waiting for an answer, the red-headed teen turned his back to the group and made his way back down the stairs to finish what he had been doing before Mr. Gold had showed up. Shaking his head with another small smile, Naruto looked back to the teens on the balcony with him and was met with 4 faces full of questions. Letting out a sigh as he walked back to the table with the book he was working on restoring, Naruto got back to work, and just as they were about to bombard him with questions, he spoke. "I've known Gaara for around 5 years, give or take a few mouths. He was from a neighboring village. His brother and his sister came to my village for an even, and that's when we met. He's been able to control sand ever since he was born, and because of it his life hasn't been easy. That's all I'll say on the matter, the rest is for him to tell." Nodding their heads in understanding, the 14 said their goodbyes to both Naruto and Gaara and left, inviting the sand user to Robin's party on their way out. Later that night, after they had locked up the store, both Naruto and Gaara were stood in one of the training grounds that the blonde and his clothes had added the night Gaara had first moved in. It was basically a large circular room with seals painted into the roof for light and a lot of sand that he had had a clone bring using a sealing scroll to transport it. It still amazed him no one had noticed the large hole the clone had left in the middle of the desert. The reason they were here was because the sand helped to calm Gaara, who had been having trouble staying in control of his darker urges even since what had happened with Gold and his thugs earlier in the day. The sand user could still hear the one tail in his head whispering in his ear and trying to get him to go on a killing spree. Naruto had been trying to find a way to strengthen his friend Seal, but there were a lot of scrolls about seals in his library and he was yet to find anything that could help. The blonde teen watched from the side of the room as Gaara sat with his legs crossed in the center, arms crossed over his chest and eyes closed as he made the sand spin around him so it looked like he was in the middle of a sandstorm with long tendrils flailing around outside the cyclone in seemingly random patterns. After he had done this for an hour straight, Gaara let the sand settle and slowly stood, wiping off grains of sand, and walked over to lean against the wall next to his friend. "Have your clones finished the room yet?" "About half an hour ago." "You realize that if you're wrong about this it could be a disaster?" Smiling to his friend with the brim of his hat covering his eyes, Naruto moved to the door without answering him, Gaara following a moment later. He led the red-headed sand user to the corridor that had the bedrooms and stopped at one that stood out from the rest. Instead of an oak door like the others that lined the walls, it was made out of thick steel, with large blots around the edges, and 5 different locks that could only be undone from the outside. When he opened the door, it was to reveal a normal-looking room with a large king-sized bed, dresser and a desk. The walls, ceiling and floor were covered in seals that to Gaara meant nothing. Turning to look at the blonde stood next to the door, Naruto saw the real emotion that was being shown on his face. Fear. He might not have found a way to fix the seal on Gaara's stomach yet, but he had found a way to let him sleep, at least he hoped he did. The seals were designed to absorb the Shukaku's demonic chakra if it reached a certain level and would purify it into nature chakra. The theory was that when Shukaku tried to flood Gaara's coils with its tainted chakra to gain control, the seals would suck it out fast enough to stop it from gaining control. They were lucky the one-tails was the weakest of the tailed beasts because Naruto wouldn't have been able to do something like this for anything above the 3 tails, and that was a stretch. The reason Gaara was scared was because if he was only slightly off with his calculations, then Shukaku would be released, and with them being in such a large city, thousands could die. Giving the teen one last smile, Naruto closed the door. The next morning Naruto was stood outside the steel door with a satisfied expression on his face as he took note of the undamaged door. Letting out a sigh of relief, he took a step towards the door and knocked 3 times. After waiting for 2 minutes, he got a reply in the form of 3 knocks. Smiling to himself, Naruto quickly unlocked all the doors and swung it open to find Gaara actually smiling at him. It was surprising just how much difference one night of sleep made. His skin looked a few shades healthier with a bit of color in his cheeks, the rings around his eyes had faded slightly, and his face looked less stiff. The fact that he was openly smiling at him surprised Naruto. "I take it you slept well." "Indeed." "Good." Without another word, Naruto made his way to the kitchen to make them both breakfast, the smile on his face never leaving his lips. At night Naruto and Gaara were making their way down the street to the pizza corner. The sun was just starting to get low in the sky, and they could already hear the music from the party echoing around the almost empty streets. Naruto was dressed in a long-sleeved red t-shirt with a white shirt over the top left unbuttoned, dark blue jeans, and his usual fingerless gloves and bucket hat. Under his left arm was a tube-shaped object wrapped in green paper with the words "Happy Birthday" printed all over it, and in his other hand was a box that stretched to about 7 feet long, but only a few inches wide, wrapped in the same paper. Despite Naruto's best efforts to change his mind, Gaara had refused to change, not feeling comfortable without the thick leather coat he used to hide his sand, and had decided to go to the party in his normal clothes. Thinking back to the red-headed teen's reaction when he had explained what a party was brought a smile to Naruto's face, his friend never having heard of a party before and shocked that someone would actually invite him to one. As they turned a corner, the pizza corner that Cyborg had told him about came into view, a quaint 2-story building with a small balcony on the 2nd floor and a patio with several tables set up on the outside. They could see all the other teens that had been invited to the party, along with what Naruto was sure were a few that weren't, through the windows, and could see most of them were dancing to the loud music. They had no trouble getting in, though they did have a little problem getting through the crowd and started to look for any sign of the titans in the massive moving bodies. Gaara had been drawing a lot of attention because his odd choice of clothing, but nobody really cared, having too much fun to worry about one strange boy. Between the loud music, flashing multicolored lights and dancing teens all around them, it took the 2X ninja half an hour before they were able to find Cyborg, and they were only able to find him because of his size and the fact he had burped louder than the music. "Hey Tin-san, I see you're enjoying yourself." "Naruto, hey man, how you been, not seen you for a while." "Not bad, let me introduce my friend, Cyborg-san, Gaara, Cyborg-san. So you're the one Terra wouldn't stop talking about, nice to meet you." The only reply he got was a small nod. After the introductions were finished, the mechanical teen led the two up the stairs to the 2nd floor, where it was a lot less crowded. Unlike the downstairs where all the teens had been dancing, the room out on the 2nd floor had tables set around the edge for people to sit and talk. They could still hear the music from the lower floor, and a few people were dancing, but nowhere near as many, though Naruto did see Starfire floating above the heads of people, twirling around with a large smile on her face. They found Robin sat at a table with Raven and Terra not far from the balcony, a pile of presents stacked on the table. Naruto was trying not to laugh. Robin was wearing a smart black suit with a white shirt and bow tie, and his mask. He wore his mask to his birthday party. "Traffic Light-san, happy birthday." "My name's not Traffic Light." Smiling to himself at getting a reaction out of the boy, Naruto slid into the seat next to Raven and put his arm around her shoulders, his smile turning into a grin when he saw the red spreading across her gray skin. At least until she punched him in the ribs, winding the blonde and forcing him to pull his arm away. "You're so cold, Raven-chan." Shaking his head at the two's antics, Robin turned his attention to the red-headed boy that had come with the blonde, taking note of the strange scar on his forehead and odd choice of clothes. Standing up and walking over to the Gaara, the masked teen offered his hand. "You must be Gaara. Terra hasn't stopped talking about you since yesterday." For a moment the sand user just looked at the offered hand with a blank expression, seeming unsure what to do before slowly, with slight hesitation, he brought his own hand up and shook. Robin took note of the way he didn't put any pressure into the shake and just let Robin control the handshake. It was at this point that Naruto saw something out of the corner of his eye and a deep frown spread across his lips before he stood from his seat and put on a fake smile. "I'll be right back, Gaara, you stay here and try to be social." Without waiting for a response, he walked off in towards a table at the other end of the room where Beast Boy was sat with a few people they didn't recognize. Shrugging his shoulders, Robin went back to his seat and offered Gaara the one next to him so they could talk. "So Raven and Terra told me you have control over sand. That an impressive power. Have you ever considered become a part of a team?" "No. Why not? We could use someone like you." "I have my reasons, one of which is I have no right to protect people with the things I have done in the past." Before the masked team could push for more detail, he was interrupted by Raven, who decided to try and learn more about Naruto through his quite red-headed friend. "So how do you know Naruto? He said you were from a neighboring village and came to his with your family." "My older brother Kankuro and older sister Temari." The way he talked without any emotion was a little off-putting for the three teens, his face didn't even twitch. "So how did you become friends?" "He saved me." "From what?" "Before I met Uzumaki-san, I was trapped in a darkness of my own creation, unable to see anything but an endless void." Realization came to Terra's face, thinking about how she had been depressed before she met the Titans because of the way people treated her, and from what Naruto had said the day before, thought that maybe Gaara had been through the same thing. "So you were depressed?" "No, homicidal. The first time I met Uzumaki I almost killed him." At his words, Robin, who had just been taking a drink from his glass on the table, coughed with his mouth full of water and spat it out all over the floor in shock. "What did you say?" Naruto had known he moment Gaara explained how he had arrived in this world that the other must have come too. They had been closer to him when the jutsu had gone wrong after all, so it only made sense that they would have been dragged along with him. But even knowing that he wasn't expecting to run into them so soon after Gaara had turned up on his doorstep. As he made his way across the room to the three girls sat at a table with Beast Boy, he couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at the fact they were wearing grey school uniforms with small skirts and red ties, though he took note they each had their Konoha headbands tied around their waists like belt. Letting a smirk cross his face as he closed the distance, the blonde made a note of the fact Beast Boy seemed to be trying to flirt with a blonde-haired girl, sat next to him with little success, and made a note to tech him a few things later. Next to her was a girl with bright pink hair and green eye that was looking at the green teen with slight amusement in her eyes, mixed with an odd nostalgia, and sat on the end was a girl with a shy look on her face and dark blue, almost black hair and eyes that looked milky white. In other words, Ino Yamanaka, Sakura Haruno and Hinata Hyuga, three of the last people he wanted to see. Deciding to just get it over with, he sat down next to Hinata, his hat casting a shadow over his eyes slightly and a large grin on his face. The moment their eyes fell on him, they all let out a gasp, and every muscle in their bodies tensed in preparation to fight if the need should arise. "Well, look what the cat dragged in. I must admit I didn't expect to see you three again anytime soon, or at all for that matter." Betting a confused look on his face from the blonde's words and the reaction the girls seemed to have to him, Beast Boy looked from the still smirking Naruto to the tense girls. The girl with the pink hair, Sakura if he remembered right, had actually stopped her hand halfway to her mouth with a glass in her hand. "Oh hey Naruto, you guys know each other or something?" "You could say that. Hey Beast-san, why don't you go and find Cyborg-san? I think he said something about a burping contest downstairs. I need to talk to these three for a while." Casting one last look at the three girls, the green teen gave a hesitant nod and got up from his seat. "Yeah, sure thing man, I'll see you later." The moment Beast Boy was out of earshot, Naruto let out a sigh. Poor guy, he's been a bit depressed since Terra-san told him she only thinks of him as a friend. I need to remember to give him a few tips on how to talk to girls. Reminds me of how I used to act. Turning his attention back to the three girls sat at the table and noticing they were still stiff. He took note of the dark blush on Hinata's face and let out a small chuckle. "Relax. I'm not going to do anything unless you started. We're at a party, enjoy yourselves." Sakura quickly shifted her eyes to Ino before locking them with the blonde. After taking a moment to take in his new appearance, including the way she could now see his lean muscular frame that wasn't covered by his hideous baggy kill me orange jacket and simple yet expensive looking clothes, the pink-haired put her glass down with a frown on her face. "What are you doing here, Naruto?" Raising an eyebrow at her cold tone, though the smirk never left his lips, the blonde ex-ninja tilted his head up just enough to let them see his eye from under the brim of his hat. "Like I said, it's a party, I was invited." The smirk still hadn't left Naruto's face, and it was starting to worry the girls that he was being so calm, they were still trying to catch him after all. But everything about the blonde teen in front of them screamed confidence, the smirk, the look in his eyes, even his relaxed posture were yelling out that he wasn't the least bit worried by their presence. He had always been confident, overly so, but now it didn't seem forced like it used to be. "You need to come back with us, it's been 3 years Naruto Baka, you've had your fun, and now it's time to return to Konoha." The smirk only grew at the Pinkette's words, and even with the hat shadowing the top part of his face, the three Kunoichi could tell he had raised one of his eyebrows at her in amusement. Do you even know why I left, or care? No, of course not, why would you? It's not like any of you care. You have your orders to bring me back and that's all that matters, right? What the hell happened to you, Naruto? This doesn't sound anything like you. Fixing his eyes on Ino, the whiskered teen folded his arms behind his head and leaned back in his seat. I thought the scarecrow would have told you by now. I basically told him that night 3 years ago. I must have given him too much credit. Sighing to himself, Naruto stood from his seat and, chuckling slightly at the way the three Kunoichi stiffened at his sudden movement, started to head back to the table he had left Gaara and the others, throwing one last comment over his shoulder. You should stay and enjoy the party, have a few drinks, dance, have some fun. I've created a life for myself here that I never could back in Konoha and have no intention of giving it up. Turning away from the three Kunoichi, Naruto didn't see Ino making a hand sigh and aiming it in his direction. Chapter 5 Love and Hate. The first thing that crossed Ino's mind when she looked at her surroundings was that this was a big mistake. The jutsu had been a success, at least in part, and she was in Naruto's mind like she had planned. The problem was that instead of taking over his body, like she had meant to, Ino found herself in a place that made Aour's blood run cold. Her father had told her what it meant when something like this happened and had warned her of the danger that came with it. She was in Naruto's Mindscape, a somewhat physical manifestation of the mind that few people had. It took years for a person's mind to create one, and normally, from what her father had told her, they were basic at best, an open field or dark cave, something big but simple that didn't take much for the mind to create an image. The other thing that he had warned her about was that everything in a mindscape, from the smallest flower in a field to the largest crack in a cave wall, was a reflection on the person that created it. It was that thought that had her scared at the scene before her now. Ino was stood in the middle of the main road of a scale replica of Konoha, with all the same buildings she and the others had grown up with. The problem with it was that the entire village was in ruins, the building creaked and some even fallen down altogether, wild vines and weeds grow over everything in sight, and off in the distance she could see what was left of the Hokage monument, most of which looked like it had been clawed off. It was as if thousands of years had passed and the village was collapsing in on itself. Above her head the sky was completely black, not a star in sight, and a large blood-red moon, bathing the ruined village in its red glow. Slowly making her way down the street, the blonde Kunoichi didn't even realize she was being followed. It were little more than a shadow, jumping from roof to roof, sneaking through the shadows, staying just at the edge of her blind spot and not making any sound at all. Eventually Ino realized she wasn't alone and, turning quickly in an attempt to catch sight of her pursuer, was able to see a shadow flash across the street into a side alley for a moment before it disappeared. Quickly running back to the end of the alley, Ino stopped and peered into the darkness. Naruto, is that you? This isn't funny, Baka. Suddenly the air around her grew thicker and it got harder and harder to breathe. Terrible images started flashing through her head as her legs gave out beneath her. She saw all her friends lying on the ground around her, bleeding, dying. Then it switched to a fire, people screaming as it spread, then people dying from starvation, then disease. Each flash brought a different image of death, and without realizing it the young Yamanaka started to scream. In all the images there was one other constant other than death, a small, shadowed figure with one blue and one red eye, glowing through the darkness that seemed to cling to it like a second skin, hiding it from her view. She could see it in all the images, smiling at her, watching her as she fell apart. From the darkness of the alley a figure could be seen walking slowly, making its way towards the downed form of Ino, who was now curled up on the ground in the fetal position, staring into space and muttering quietly to herself. As the figure stepped out of the shadows and into her line of sight, her eyes widened. Bending down so it could whisper in her ear with a small smile on its face, it spoke in an oddly childlike voice. I disagree, Yamanaka-san. I think this is very funny. As they watched Naruto making his way across the room, Sakura and Hinata didn't miss the way he stumbled a moment after their blonde friend slumped in her seat, and they both smiled. But when he turned to look at them over his shoulder with a smirk, both frowned. Turning confused eyes to the now conscious Ino, both gasped when they saw her eyes roll into the back of her head. Gaara looked at the shocked face of the three teens, sat around him with a black face, slowly reached into his coat and pulled out a flask of water he kept on him at all times because he didn't trust other people not to try poisoning him. If he was one to show his emotions like Naruto, the red-headed sand user would probably be laughing at the shocked faces staring at him. It took several minutes before Raven seemed to pull herself together enough to talk. What do you mean by almost killed him? Turning to look at the gray-skinned teen, Gaara just looked at her for a moment before putting his flask away. I mean, when we first met I attempted to kill him and several of his friends in a fit of insanity. Robin found his hand had been moving down towards his belt without realizing it, only to remember he didn't have his utility belt. Shaking his head in an attempt to clear it, the masked leader of the Titans narrowed his eyes at Gaara. Are you saying that you attempted to kill someone? Is that what you meant when you said you didn't have a right to protect people because of your past? Hardly, mostly it's because of all the people I killed before I met Uzumaki-san. Before they could ask any more questions, Naruto sat back in his seat next to Raven with a small smile that slipped off his face as he looked at the teens around him. Taking in both Raven and Robin's stiff postures and Terra's pale face, it didn't take him long to understand what had happened, and he let out a sigh as he turned to his red-headed friend. You told them about yourself, didn't you? Yes, is this another one of the things I need to learn to keep to myself? At the blonde's nod, Gaara seemed to think for a moment before turning to address the three teens. I apologize for making you uncomfortable. Sighing at his friend again, Naruto told him to go and wait for him on the balcony while he spoke to the others for a moment. Without saying a word, the sand user stood and made his way out to the empty balcony. Turning to the three still shell-shocked teens sat with him, Naruto scratched the back of his head. From your faces I can guess he was talking about before we met. He said he's killed people and that he tried to kill you. Closing his eyes and chuckling uncomfortably, the blonde ex-ninja gave Robin a weak smile. Look, long story short, Gaara had a mental breakdown when he was 5 and started killing people as a way to prove to himself that he existed. At their shocked faces, Naruto nodded. He spent years trying to get over what he did, but no matter how many times I try to reason with him that it wasn't his fault, he still thinks himself a monster. Getting up from his seat yet again, Naruto silently made his way over to the balcony. When he saw Gaara, he wasn't surprised to find him stood at the railing of the balcony looking out over the city with a cigarette in his hand. Making his way to stand next to his friend, Naruto leaned his back on the railing and raised his eyebrow. You got any more? I ran out. Patching the half-empty packet that the redhead threw at him without even looking in his direction, Naruto smiled and, after looking around to make sure no one was watching, lit it by channeling fire chakra into his thumb. The result being a small flame lighting up at the end of his thumb. It was a habit he had picked about a year after he arrived in this world. He had a clone henge into an older version of himself, and ever since he had been hooked. It always made him laugh when someone took it upon themselves to remind him they would kill him one day, because no matter how much he smoked, his healing factor made it like he never smoked a day in his life. Apparently Gaara just stole some by accident and, like Naruto, had been hooked. Taking several deep breaths of the noxious fumes, neither of them spoke for a while, just enjoying the feeling of the smoke filling their lungs. Baruno, Yamanaka and Hyuga were here. Is that why you left? We spoke, I warned them to leave me alone, and then Ino tried to use her mind transfer jutsu on me when my back was turned. Foolish, she should have known better than to try that on a normal Jinchuriki, let alone someone like you. Which one found her first? Wrath, but lust stepped in before any permanent damage could be done. That's good. Do they know I'm here? No. Falling into another comfortable silence, the two Jinchuriki finished their cigarettes before Naruto leaned over and whispered something to Gaara, which the redhead nodded to and made his way back inside, leaving Naruto to light up another. After a moment of deep thought, he chuckled lightly and, without turning to face them, addressed a person hid in the shadows. Did you hear all of that, Raven-chan? Realizing that she had been found, Raven stepped out of the shadow with a small blush on her face at being caught and, putting the fact that he shouldn't have been able to see her while in a shadow to the back of her mind for later thought, made her way over to stand next to the blonde and frowned slightly when she saw the cigarette between his lips. Those things will kill you. The only response he gave her was a grin that seemed to scream she had missed something. So how much did you hear? What's a Jinchuriki? Now where would be the fun if I told you that? Like I said, I need to keep a few things to myself or you'll get bored of me. Fine, then who were the people you were talking about? And why would you need to tell them to leave you alone? Just some old friends that I haven't seen for a while. It didn't sound like they were your friends. We didn't part on the best of terms. After that they didn't say anything for a few minutes, they just stood on the balcony looking out over the city. When Naruto finished his cigarette, he turned to the gray-skinned teen with a smile. So if I ask you to dance, are you just going to hit me again? Drawing her face away to hide the blush that found its way to her cheeks, Raven smiled for a moment before looking back at him with her usual stoic expression. I guess one dance couldn't hurt, assuming you can actually dance, that is. Ooh, kitty has claws. Do you want to dance or not? In answer to her question, Naruto grinned, grabbed her hand and pulled her back inside to where those that came upstairs were dancing in the middle of the room. It was at this point that Raven noticed the song that was playing was, and the blush once again spread across her face at realizing it was a slow song. There was a grin on Naruto's face as he placed his hand on her waist, causing a table to their left to suddenly glow with a black aura and seemingly implode on itself, and leaned forward to rest his head on her shoulder, slowly swaying to the music and humming along. You can thank Gaara for the song. What? Chuckling quietly at the slight stutter in her voice, Naruto elaborated. I asked him to request a few slow songs. Sneaky. Thank you, I try. They stayed like that for several minutes, moving with the music in each other's arms. The smile never left Raven's face the whole time they were dancing. It felt nice, being in his arms, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Because of her powers, Raven hadn't been able to do things like this growing up, what with them being affected by her emotions, so she had missed out on a lot of things other girls took for granted. If only she knew how similar the blonde's thoughts were to her own at that very moment. Because of the villagers turning the younger generation against him, he didn't exactly have the best social life. In fact, this was actually the first party he had ever been to. All this, being in a different world, owning his own bookstore, Raven, it all didn't seem real at times. But right now, with her in his arms, it was real, she was real. Here he was, slow dancing with a beautiful girl at a party. Seeing the smile on his face, Raven grew confused by the odd look in his eyes, it was so intense a shiver went down her spine. That was when it hit her. They were the eyes of someone that had seen too much and couldn't believe what was happening around them. It was the same look Raven herself had before joining the Titans. It was also at that moment that the conversation she had had with Terra came to the forefront of her mind. What did it feel like? The light, I mean. You said it was like the sun, but what else? Closing her eye in thought, Terra frowned slightly at the memory. I don't know how to explain it. Like I said, it was comforting, but that was what was being directed at me, like it was trying to make me feel better. It was so powerful, like nature itself was concentrated into one spot. I could feel it spreading warmth throughout my body. But when I felt it in the cave, when it was so close. Trailing off, the teens started to panic when the Earth user started to cry. It was so lonely, so sad. I think it was comforting me without realizing it because it couldn't stand the idea of something else feeling anywhere close to how it felt. It held so much pain. I don't understand how could something so sad and in so much pain feel so good to be around. When you freed me, I wasn't screaming because of being trapped. I was screaming for the light, for its pain. What if she had been right and Naruto really was in pain and just hiding it? The thought of the blonde hiding something like that didn't sit well with her. Sure, he could be serious, and more than once he had even seemed a little scary, but not sad, never sad. She couldn't even picture what he would look like even if he was. Without realizing it, Raven pulled the taller boy closer to her, resting her head on his chest as they continued to dance to the music. After another few minutes had passed, Naruto pulled her away from the dance floor and led her to an empty table. Sitting down with a huge smile on his face, the blonde tilted his head towards the empty set next to him. So, what's your assessment? Can I dance or not? Taking the seat he had offered, Raven took on a thoughtful expression on her face before a small smirk graced her lips. You're okay, I guess. Oh cock, how dare you say I'm only okay. I'll have you know there are many girls that love my dancing. Trying not to laugh at the mortified look on the blonde's face, Raven adapted a bored expression on her own face before answering. Then you should have asked one of them to dance. They stared at each other for several minutes, neither saying anything. Then, unable to hold it back anymore, Naruto let a grin spread across his lips and laughed. After another few minutes he had calmed himself down and they fell into a comfortable silence. Chuckling to himself, Naruto let a small smile cross his lips and sighed. So, you want to go see a movie sometime? The shocked look on Raven's face was possibly the funniest thing he had ever seen. He had been thinking long and hard about him and Raven, along with a lot of other things, and after going over the good and the bad points had decided that it was worth it. He liked Raven, she was beautiful, smart, and so many other things. He was in a new world, with people that know nothing about his past, why not live? Naruto's smile only grew when he saw the blush spreading across the gray-skinned teen's cheeks. Sure, that sounds great. The moment they walked through the door into the warehouse carrying an unconscious Ino between them, Sakura and Hinata were surrounded by the other Leaf Nin that had come with them to this world. After waving them off and moving Ino to a bed to lay down, they all gathered so the two girls could explain what had happened. Not much had changed in the 3 years they had been stranded in this world, other than a few improvements to the warehouse. After getting the necessary papers to live in this world, they had started to raise money. Kakashi got a job as a taxi driver. It didn't pay much, but it was good for information gathering. No one ever thought about the drive when they were talking. Sasuke, Shikamaru and Lee had opened a gym together after stealing enough money to buy a building and the equipment. Lee worked as a martial arts instructor, while Sasuke was a personal trainer and Shikamaru handled the business. Another thing that had changed was their clothes. The silver-haired Jonin now wore a white button-up shirt with blue jeans and a brown jacket. Over his left eye was a simple black eye patch, and instead of the mask he used to wear to cover the bottom half of his face, he now had a thick blue woolen scarf. Lee now wore a dark green karate gi that had its sleeves cut FF at the elbow, with white bandages wrapped around his hands and feet. Sasuke wore a dark red shirt, black jeans and a black leather jacket with the Uchiha clan symbol on his back. Last was Shikamaru, who now wore a grey t-shirt with a black jacket with the sleeves torn off at the shoulders and a pair of blue jeans with rips in the knees. The one thing they all had in common was the Konoha headbands they used as belts. They were all sat in what had been turned into the common room of the warehouse, consisting of 2 couches, an armchair, a small coffee table, a TV. Leaning forward in the armchair to look at the 2 kunoichi with his one visible eye, Kakashi spoke with a serious voice. What happened? Squeezing Sasuke's hand in hers, Sakura sighed. We saw Naruto. For a moment nothing happened, it was completely silent. Then her words seemed to register in all their minds at the same time and they all started talking at once. Over the sound of all their voices overlapping, Sasuke's was the only one that could be heard clearly. Where is he? What happened? Did you talk to him? What did he say? After waiting for them all to calm down, Sakura continued. Hinata sat next to her on the couch with her head lowered, not meeting anyone's eyes. He was at the party we were invited to, the one for that hero kid Robin. We were sat at a table talking to the green guy when he walked over and sat at the table. Holding his hands in the air to stop her talking, Shikamaru got a confused look on his face. He just walked right up to you? Pretty much, he just sat down, sent the green guy away and started talking to us. After taking a moment to think, Kakashi frowned. What can you tell us about the way he was acting? Was he like that night 3 years ago? Not exactly, he wasn't like that night, but he wasn't like the usual Naruto either. He seemed more confident, in control, he didn't even shout or anything like he used to. I see, that still doesn't explain what happened that night though. I think I can explain that. They all turned to the open doorway to find Ino leaning against the doorframe, her skin pale and bags under her eyes. After Lee helped her to the couch they all looked at her with worry in their eyes. Ino, you should be resting. Rolling her eyes at her pink-haired friend, Ino leaned back in her seat and sighed. I know why he was acting so wired 3 years ago. Seeing that she had their attention, the blonde kunoichi continued. When I used my mind transfer jutsu on him. You what? Ino, I warned you not to try and enter his mind. I know, but do you have any idea just how dangerous and stupid that was? People had died from entering the mind of a Jinchuriki. I know. Will you let me finish? Still frowning at what the girl had done and sending more towards the other 2 kunoichi on his team, Kakashi nodded for her to go on. Naruto has multiple personality disorder. You're kidding, right? I wish I was, and it not just one. I ended up in his Mindscape, which is basically what Konoha might look like in 1,000 years, and got attacked by one of his personalities. They all saw her body physically shiver at the thought before pulling herself back together. I don't know what it did to me, I think it was using killing intent, but not like any Kai I've ever felt before. I don't know what would have happened if the other one didn't show up when it did. What happened next confused them all as a large blush spread across Ino's face. Ino knew this was it. She was going to die, here in Naruto's mind. But even though she knew what was about to happen, all Ino could think about was the fact that stood over her, with his face covered in shadows and a small smile on his face, was a 6-year-old Naruto. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood pulled up to cover most of his hair and a pair of torn blue jeans. He had his hand in the large pocket at the front of his hoodie and his feet were bare and dirty. From where she was lying on the ground, Ino could see that while his left eye was the same blue it had always been, his right was blood red with a vertical slit going down the middle, and both his eyes had deep bags under them, and the whisker marks on his cheeks were thicker and darker than the real Naruto. It was the eyes that scared her the most. They were too old, too serious for a 6-year-old to have. It was like looking into a veteran ninja's eyes. They were filled with so much pain it actually hurt to look into them, yet no matter how hard she tried. The young Yamanaka could look anywhere else. You shouldn't have come here, Yamanaka-san, shouldn't have tried to control us. Now you'll pay for what you've done to us. In a choked voice that she had to force out, Ino managed to talk in a weak voice. I haven't done anything to you. You're the same as all the rest. You ignored us until you had a use for us. You never cared about us. That's not true. Don't lie to us. Ino cringed at his words. When he shouted his voice became distorted, like several voices were talking at the same time. After taking a moment to calm down, the 6-year-old blonde looked back down at her with an impassive expression. We're going to kill you, slowly, painfully. You're going to feel everything we did growing up, and when you're begging for death, begging to be released from your torment, only then will we kill you. When he finished, the same pressure that had made her see all those terrible images from before returned, the picture of death and destruction not far behind. All she could do was scream. Wrath. As quickly as it came, the pressure disappeared and, through blurry vision, Ino could just make out the form of the young Naruto, turning to look at something she couldn't see. This has nothing to do with you, lust, she entered our mind, and for that she must pay. Stop this foolishness, Wrath, let her go, I'll make sure she leaves. No one has to die. We want her blood. I said no. For a moment nothing happened and, through her now clear eyes, Ino could see the now identified wrath glaring at whoever the other person was that was standing just out of her sight. All she could tell was that whoever it was they were male and older than Wrath, judging from the deeper tone in his voice. The young blonde stood his ground for several minutes before growling to himself and, after sending one last glare at the still downed Ino, turned and jumped to the of one of the nearby buildings and was gone from sight a moment later. Letting out a breath she didn't know she had been holding, Ino couldn't stop herself as the tears fell down her face and her body was racked with sobs. It took the blonde Kunoichi several minutes before she realized that a pair of strong arms were circled around her, pulling her into and holding her against a muscular chest. She could hear the same voice as before whispering into her ear, comforting her and trying to calm her down. When Ino did calm down and had wiped the tears from her eyes, she looked to her savior to thank him when her eyes widened yet again at what she saw. Lust looked like a 20-year-old Naruto and was the most perfect-looking person she had ever seen. He stood just over 6 foot tall, with a well-muscular frame and a tan most women would kill for. He wore a white Victorian-style shirt with a pair of black skin-tight pants and black leather gloves on his hands. His hair was slightly longer than the real Naruto's, with his fringe just covering his deep blue eyes, and his face was more sculpted than his teenage self with the whiskers marks on his cheeks, faded so much they could barely be seen. When he saw her looking at him, a gentle smile spread across his lips and a small chuckle escaped his throat. Sitting her up and taking a step back, the older version of Naruto crouched down in front of the still blushing Ino, the smile never leaving his face. You should feel better soon, though when you return to your body you'll be a little weak and have a killer headache. Wrath has that effect on people. It took a moment for his words to register in the young Kunoichi's mind, the fact that his voice sounded like honey in her ears didn't help. How could one man, Naruto no less, be this sexy? Shaking her head in an attempt to clear her thoughts, Ino frowned when the image of the boy came back into her mind. What the hell is going on? Who the hell were that and who the hell are you? The smile still didn't leave his face. He just crouched there in front of her, smiling like nothing had happened. You know, for such a cute girl, you sure have a mouth, Ino-chan. I wonder what else it's good for. For a moment Ino was left speechless. Did he just say what she thought he said? Before she could ask him what he meant, Lust stood up from his crouch and offered her high hand to help her up, and when she was on her feet took her hand and started to lead her down the street. As much as I would love to get to know you better, you can't stay. I was able to stop Wrath from killing you, but if the others decide to take his side, I will not be able to stop them killing you. You're lucky I was able to stop him. What do you mean others? What the hell is going on here? Who are you? Stopping at the end of the street, Lust looked around as if to make sure the coast was clear before turning back to Ino. Did you really think that someone could go through what Naruto did without there being some kind of physiological damage? We are all a part of one whole, puzzle pieces if you will. How many of you are there? For a moment he didn't say anything, just looked her in the eye and smiled. Something you need to understand, Ino-chan, just because I saved you doesn't mean I'm on your side. The fact is that if you were an actual threat I'd kill you myself. As it is, you're not, and I don't like the idea of killing if it's not necessary, it goes against my nature. At his words Ino's eyes widened and without realizing it she took a step back. Chuckling to himself, Lust shook her head at the scared look on her face before stepping forward to close the distance between them and rested a gloved hand on her cheek. Like I said, I don't like killing, so I'm going to send you back to your own body. Sweet dreams, Ino-chan. As he said this, Lust leaned his head forward and placed a gentle kiss on her forehead. Before she could ask what he was doing, Ino was hit with a sudden drowsiness. It swept through her entire body and within seconds she collapsed to the floor. Just before she lost consciousness completely and her eyes had started to blur, Ino could just make out 6 other figures appearing around Lust, but before she could make any of them out her eyes closed and she saw no more. For a moment they all just stared at Ino, no one knew what to say. The fact that Naruto had multiple personality disorder explained a lot, including why he had been acting like he did that night 3 years ago. After a few minutes had passed, Kakashi sighed and turned to Shikamaru. What do you make of all this? Frowning, the lazy Nara took a moment to think about everything he had heard before leaning back into his seat. Troublesome, from what Ino told us it's clear it wasn't Naruto that stabbed the Chunin at the Gator Saw 3 years ago. If I had to guess I'd say it was this Wrath that attacked Ino, from the way he was referring to himself as we and us, instead of I and me, also going off the names Wrath and Lust, along with the fact you said there were others. I think there are 7 personalities inside Naruto's head. Frowning, Kakashi leaned forward in his chair. How did you come to that conclusion? Lust and wrath are 2 of the 7 deadly sins. Lust, wrath, greed, envy, sloth, gluttony and pride. Jumping to her feet and waving her arms in the air, Sakura let out a shaky laugh before looking at each of the others in the eye, ending Shikamaru. Wait just a minute, are telling us that the 7 deadly sins are inside Naruto's head? How is that even possible? The one that was called Lust asked Ino if she was as she really expected someone could go through all that Naruto did without there being some kind of physiological damage. We all know what his childhood was like, and I think his mind created them to deal with it. They're not the actual sins, but rather manifestations of his pain. After they all took a moment to digest the new information, Sasuke stood and started pacing. Something isn't right. Looking to her boyfriend with confused eyes, Sakura got up and placed a hand on his arm to stop him pacing and turned him to look at her. What do you mean? If it was this wrath that was controlling Naruto 3 years ago, then why did he threaten you? Why not go back to Konoha when he was in control again? Sighing in exhaustion, Kakashi shook his head and stood up. The only one that can answer that is Naruto. You said he sent the Green Titan away, do you think they knew each other? Definitely. Thinking for a moment, the silver-haired Jonin nodded to himself before turning back to the 16s. Then we have somewhere to start. Sasuke, I want you and Hinata to follow the Titans, see if they lead you to Naruto. If you find him, don't approach him, call me and we'll all do it together. After that they all left to get some sleep, and it wasn't until they had all gone that Kakashi realized Shikamaru was still in the room with him. What's on your mind? When are you planning to tell them that even if we catch Naruto, there is no guarantee he will be able to send us home? Your summoning jutsu doesn't work in this world, and it was a reverse summoning that brought us here. We'll cross that road when it comes. For now we have to hope he can. What if lazy Naruto joins Teen Titans? Naruto X Raven end here, and thanks for watching my video till the end.